NATO's Role, an international coalition during the war in Afghanistan, written by Vince Bywaters, narrated by Sophia Weatherson. Chapter 1, Introduction to NATO and the War in Afghanistan. NATO, or the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, is a military alliance formed in 1949 to provide collective defense against aggression, primarily focused on safeguarding the democratic values and security of its member nations. Over time, its role has expanded from traditional defense to addressing global security challenges, including the fight against terrorism and the stabilization of conflict zones. The war in Afghanistan became a key test for NATO's evolving mission, showcasing its capabilities in out-of-area operations far beyond the traditional borders of its members. The decision to involve NATO in Afghanistan followed the September 11, 2001, terrorist attacks on the United States, which were planned and orchestrated by al-Qaeda, a terrorist group harbored by Afghanistan's Taliban regime. In response, NATO invoked Article 5 of its founding treaty for the first time in its history, declaring an attack on one member as an attack on all. The alliance's commitment to fighting terrorism led to the deployment of NATO forces in Afghanistan, initially through Operation Enduring Freedom and later through the more expansive International Security Assistance Force, ISAF mission. NATO's intervention was multifaceted, aiming not only to eliminate terrorist threats, but also to assist in rebuilding a war-torn nation. The alliance's involvement extended beyond military operations, focusing on stabilizing Afghanistan by promoting security, governance, and economic development. This commitment was based on the understanding that military force alone would not bring lasting peace. NATO recognized that its mission required close collaboration with local Afghan forces, international organizations, and governments, all working together to achieve a stable and secure Afghanistan. The war in Afghanistan posed numerous challenges for NATO. The alliance's involvement saw both successes and setbacks. While it helped to disrupt terrorist networks and support the Afghan government, it also faced harsh realities on the ground, such as difficulties in counterinsurgency operations, cultural misunderstandings, and political complexities. NATO's role, therefore, became not only about military strategy, but also about engaging in peace-building efforts, training Afghan security forces, and supporting the reconstruction of a nation shattered by decades of conflict. As NATO began its mission in Afghanistan, it understood that its role was unprecedented. It was tasked with ensuring security in a volatile region while also addressing the broader goal of nation building, making this one of the most complex and challenging operations in the history of the alliance. The ongoing nature of the conflict required NATO to adapt and evolve its strategies, with the ultimate aim of helping Afghanistan achieve long-term peace and stability. Origins and purpose of NATO. NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was established on April 4, 1949, with the signing of the North Atlantic Treaty by 12 founding members, the United States, Canada, and 10 Western European nations. The alliance was formed in response to the growing threat posed by the Soviet Union and its expanding influence in Europe following World War II. The primary purpose of NATO was to provide collective defense against potential aggression, particularly in the face of the perceived threat of Soviet expansionism during the early years of the Cold War. The signing of the treaty marked a significant shift in global security dynamics. In an era marked by the division of Europe into the Eastern Bloc under Soviet control and the Western democracies, NATO was created to promote political stability and military cooperation among member states. The treaty's core principle, enshrined in Article 5, is collective defense, meaning that an attack on one NATO member is considered an attack on all members. This commitment to mutual defense was intended to deter any potential aggressor from threatening the sovereignty of NATO nations, thereby ensuring peace and security in the North Atlantic region. NATO's formation also reflected a broader desire to promote democratic values and economic cooperation among its members. The alliance sought to foster political stability through collective security, allowing nations to strengthen their economies and societies without the fear of external aggression. The establishment of NATO also had a strategic component, helping to prevent the spread of communism and Soviet influence in Europe and ensuring that the U.S. remained engaged in European affairs. Over time, NATO's purpose expanded beyond its initial Cold War role. While the alliance's primary function remained collective defense, it began to take on additional tasks, including crisis management, cooperative security, and partnership building with non-member states. This evolution of NATO's mission has allowed it to address emerging global security threats, such as terrorism, cyber threats, and regional instability. NATO's origins are rooted in a vision of unity and mutual support in the face of external threats. The alliance's continued relevance and adaptability are a testament to its enduring commitment to safeguarding peace, stability, and the democratic values shared by its member nations. The role of NATO in global security. NATO plays a pivotal role in maintaining global security by addressing a wide range of challenges that extend far beyond its original mandate of collective defense in Europe. Over the years, the alliance has adapted to new threats and emerging security concerns, becoming a key player in shaping international stability and promoting peace worldwide. The cornerstone of NATO's role in global security remains its primary function of collective defense. Through Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, NATO ensures that any attack on one member is considered an attack on all, which deters potential aggressors. This commitment to mutual defense not only strengthens the security of member nations, but also promotes stability in regions where NATO operates, such as the Baltic states and Eastern Europe, where Russia's actions have raised concerns over territorial sovereignty. Beyond traditional defense, NATO's involvement in crisis management and conflict prevention has expanded its influence globally. The alliance has taken part in various peacekeeping missions, including the Balkans, where NATO played a crucial role in ending the violence of the Yugoslav wars and helping to stabilize the region. In addition, NATO's involvement in Afghanistan through the International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, represented a concerted effort to combat terrorism and support the reconstruction of a war-torn country, addressing both military and humanitarian concerns. NATO also works in close cooperation with non-member countries, strengthening global security through partnerships and collaboration. Its partnerships with nations like Australia, Japan, and South Korea, as well as regional organizations like the African Union, enhance its ability to address international crises. These partnerships allow NATO to engage in a range of global security issues, from disaster relief to counterterrorism operations, by providing expertise, resources, and military support where needed. Moreover, NATO has increasingly focused on emerging security challenges such as cyber threats, energy security, and the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. The alliance has developed capabilities to respond to these modern threats, ensuring that its security framework remains relevant and effective in the face of evolving risks. This adaptability is a testament to NATO's importance in maintaining peace and stability in an increasingly interconnected world. In conclusion, NATO's role in global security is multifaceted, combining traditional defense with proactive measures aimed at preventing conflict, promoting stability, and responding to emerging threats. Through its commitment to collective defense, strategic partnerships, and modern security initiatives, NATO continues to be a vital force in ensuring the safety of nations around the world. NATO's decision to intervene in Afghanistan. NATO's decision to intervene in Afghanistan marked a pivotal moment in the alliance's history, as it was the first time the organization engaged in a military operation outside of its traditional area of operations in Europe. The intervention was largely driven by the aftermath of the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks in the United States, which were orchestrated by the Al-Qaeda terrorist group. The group was based in Afghanistan and protected by the Taliban regime, which had taken control of the country in the late 1990s. In the wake of the attacks, the United States sought to dismantle al-Qaeda and eliminate the Taliban's ability to harbor terrorists. Initially, the U.S. launched Operation Enduring Freedom in October 2001, a military campaign aimed at overthrowing the Taliban government and targeting al-Qaeda operatives. However, recognizing that the long-term stabilization of Afghanistan would require broader international support, the United States and its allies turned to NATO for a more robust and sustained mission. In December 2001, NATO formally became involved in Afghanistan through the establishment of the International Security Assistance Force, ISF, initially tasked with securing Kabul, the capital, and its surrounding areas. This mission represented NATO's commitment to ensuring security and supporting the rebuilding of the Afghan government. As the Taliban regrouped and insurgent activity escalated, NATO's role expanded, and the alliance assumed control of the entire country's security, with member nations contributing military forces, resources, and expertise. The decision to intervene in Afghanistan was not without its challenges. NATO faced numerous hurdles, including navigating a complex and volatile political landscape, managing cultural differences, and responding to a decentralized insurgency. The alliance also had to address the multifaceted nature of the mission, which involved not only military action, but also humanitarian assistance, rebuilding infrastructure, and fostering democratic governance in a country devastated by years of conflict. NATO's involvement in Afghanistan was also significant because it marked a shift in the alliance's strategic focus. Traditionally, NATO's role was centered on the defense of its member states, particularly in Europe, but the intervention in Afghanistan demonstrated the alliance's willingness to take on global security challenges. The operation highlighted NATO's ability to unite member nations in pursuit of a common objective, even in the face of significant risks and uncertainties. In conclusion, NATO's decision to intervene in Afghanistan was driven by a combination of security concerns, humanitarian objectives, and the alliance's commitment to combating global terrorism. While the mission presented formidable challenges, it underscored NATO's evolving role in addressing security threats beyond its traditional borders. Chapter 2: NATO's Strategic Objectives in Afghanistan. When NATO intervened in Afghanistan in 2001, the alliance's strategic objectives were multifaceted and aimed at addressing both immediate and long-term security challenges in the region. The overarching goal was to assist in the dismantling of terrorist networks, particularly al-Qaeda, and to ensure that Afghanistan could never again serve as a safe haven for international terrorism. However, NATO's mission went beyond counterterrorism. It sought to stabilize the country and help build a functioning democratic government capable of maintaining security and promoting the welfare of its people. One of NATO's primary strategic objectives was to support the establishment and growth of Afghan security forces. A key component of the mission was to train and equip the Afghan National Army, ANA, and the Afghan National Police, ANP, enabling them to eventually take responsibility for the nation's security. NATO worked closely with the Afghan government to develop and strengthen these institutions, ensuring they were equipped with the necessary skills, resources, and organizational structures to defend the country against insurgent threats. This effort was critical, as the Afghan forces were expected to take over security duties once NATO's combat role was phased out. Another central objective was the stabilization and reconstruction of Afghanistan. NATO recognized that military action alone could not bring lasting peace to the country. As such, the alliance's mission included extensive humanitarian and developmental efforts aimed at rebuilding Afghanistan's infrastructure, promoting economic growth, and improving the quality of life for its citizens. This included efforts to rebuild schools, hospitals, and roads, while also addressing issues such as poverty, education, and human rights. NATO worked alongside various international organizations and non-governmental organizations to support the Afghan government in these areas. Furthermore, NATO's strategic objectives encompass promoting good governance and supporting the Afghan government's legitimacy. The alliance sought to help Afghanistan transition from a war-torn state with limited central authority to a functioning democracy. This involved encouraging democratic processes, including elections, and fostering a political environment where Afghan leaders could take ownership of their nation's future. NATO also helped to combat corruption within the Afghan government, a major challenge that undermined the effectiveness of the nation-building effort. In conclusion, NATO's strategic objectives in Afghanistan were wide-ranging and aimed at creating a secure, stable, and democratic state. These objectives required NATO to balance military action with efforts in training, reconstruction, and governance, recognizing that true stability in Afghanistan could only be achieved through a comprehensive, multidimensional approach. Counterterrorism and counterinsurgency goals. One of NATO's primary objectives in Afghanistan was to disrupt and dismantle the al-Qaeda terrorist network that had used the country as a base of operations prior to the 9/11 attacks. The alliance's counterterrorism mission focused on eliminating terrorist cells and preventing Afghanistan from being a safe haven for groups that could threaten international security. This goal was achieved through a combination of military operations, intelligence gathering, and cooperation with Afghan forces and international partners. To effectively combat terrorism, NATO implemented a strategy that combined direct military action with intelligence-driven operations. Special forces and conventional troops worked together to target key figures in terrorist organizations, while airstrikes, raids, and ground operations aimed to weaken the operational capabilities of insurgent groups. NATO also prioritized the disruption of supply chains and networks that facilitated terrorism in the region, limiting the ability of groups like al-Qaeda and the Taliban to plan and execute attacks both within Afghanistan and internationally. In parallel with its counterterrorism efforts, NATO focused on counterinsurgency, COIN operations, which were critical in stabilizing the country and supporting the Afghan government's authority. The insurgency, led primarily by the Taliban, posed a significant challenge to NATO forces and Afghan security forces. The goal of counterinsurgency was not only to defeat the insurgent fighters militarily, but also to win the support of the local population by addressing their grievances, providing security, and fostering political stability. NATO's counterinsurgency strategy relied heavily on hearts and minds efforts, which sought to limit the influence of the insurgency by improving the lives of ordinary Afghans. This included rebuilding infrastructure, providing humanitarian aid, and helping local leaders build governance structures that could deliver services and maintain order. NATO understood that defeating the insurgency was as much about gaining the support of the Afghan people as it was about military victories. Successful COIN operations required a delicate balance between military force and civilian engagement, ensuring that NATO's presence did not alienate the population, but instead helped to create an environment where the Afghan government could thrive. Ultimately, NATO's counterterrorism and counterinsurgency goals were interconnected, with each complementing the other in the broader strategy to secure Afghanistan's future. While significant progress was made, the complex and evolving nature of both terrorism and insurgency in the region meant that NATO's efforts had to be constantly adapted to meet new challenges. Stabilization and nation-building efforts. NATO's mission in Afghanistan extended beyond military operations to encompass stabilization and nation-building efforts, which were crucial for the long-term success of the intervention. After decades of war and instability, Afghanistan's infrastructure, economy, and political systems were in disarray. NATO recognized that military victories alone would not ensure peace. Instead, the country required comprehensive efforts to rebuild its state institutions, promote governance, and create conditions for sustainable development. A key aspect of NATO's stabilization efforts was securing key areas of the country to allow for reconstruction and the safe delivery of humanitarian aid. By maintaining control over strategic regions, NATO sought to protect civilians and facilitate the rebuilding of critical infrastructure, such as roads, schools, and hospitals. This was especially important in areas where the Taliban insurgency was active, as their presence hindered progress and intimidated local populations. NATO forces often worked alongside Afghan security forces to ensure that these areas remained stable and secure, enabling development projects to proceed without interference. In addition to physical reconstruction, NATO's nation-building efforts focused on strengthening Afghan institutions and governance. The alliance provided training and support to Afghan government officials, aiming to help them build a functional and legitimate state that could deliver services to its people. This included efforts to combat corruption, improve the rule of law, and promote human rights, particularly for women and marginalized groups. NATO worked with international organizations and local stakeholders to establish mechanisms for fair elections and the development of democratic processes, allowing Afghanistan to take ownership of its political future. The rebuilding of the Afghan economy was another key element of NATO's nation-building strategy. Economic stability was seen as essential for long-term peace, and NATO supported programs designed to stimulate economic growth, such as infrastructure development, job creation, and the expansion of markets. The alliance also encouraged foreign investment and trade, which were critical to creating a sustainable economy that could support Afghanistan's recovery after decades of war. Despite the challenges, NATO's stabilization and nation-building efforts were critical in transforming Afghanistan from a failed state to a nation striving for self-sufficiency and governance. While progress was uneven and setbacks occurred, the broader mission aimed to create an environment where Afghan institutions could thrive and where the country could eventually take full control of its future. Collaboration with Afghan government forces. One of NATO's most significant tasks in Afghanistan was to collaborate closely with Afghan government forces to ensure the country's security and long-term stability. Recognizing that NATO's military presence would eventually need to be phased out, the alliance's strategy focused heavily on strengthening the Afghan National Army, ANA, and the Afghan National Police, ANP, enabling them to take responsibility for maintaining order and defending the country against internal and external threats. From the outset, NATO's support for Afghan security forces was multidimensional. Training and capacity building were key components of this effort. NATO forces provided extensive training programs aimed at improving the operational effectiveness of the Afghan military and police. This involved not only basic combat training, but also specialized education in counterinsurgency, intelligence gathering, and logistics. By equipping Afghan forces with modern skills and strategies, NATO sought to create a self-sufficient and professional security apparatus capable of dealing with a range of security challenges, from insurgency to organized crime. NATO's collaboration with Afghan forces also involved providing essential equipment and resources. This included the supply of vehicles, weapons, communications technology, and medical equipment, which were critical to enabling the Afghan forces to carry out their duties effectively. As the Afghan security forces grew stronger, NATO began shifting the responsibility for security to them, particularly in areas where Afghan troops were already operational. Beyond military support, NATO worked with the Afghan government to promote governance and rule of law within the security forces. This collaboration aimed to ensure that the ANA and ANP operated with accountability and respect for human rights, particularly in a post-Taliban environment where abuses by security personnel had been a significant concern. NATO also assisted with the development of institutional frameworks to promote the recruitment of Afghan personnel, with a focus on inclusivity and diversity. While the partnership between NATO and Afghan forces was essential for the mission, it was not without its challenges. Coordination between Afghan leadership and NATO forces sometimes faced political and cultural obstacles, and there were instances where corruption and local power dynamics hindered progress. Nonetheless, the continued partnership between NATO and Afghan forces played a crucial role in enabling the country to move towards self-reliance in security matters, even as NATO's combat mission eventually transitioned to a support and advisory role. In conclusion, collaboration with Afghan government forces was central to NATO's strategy in Afghanistan, as it focused on building the capacity of Afghan security institutions to ensure lasting peace and stability. The partnership not only enhanced military effectiveness, but also helped shape the future of Afghanistan's governance and security. Chapter 3: Key NATO members and their contributions. NATO's mission in Afghanistan was a collective effort, supported by numerous member states that brought unique capabilities and resources to the coalition. While all members played important roles, several countries stood out for their significant contributions in terms of manpower, leadership, funding, and strategic influence. These key contributors not only bolstered NATO's operational strength, but also helped shape the direction and effectiveness of the mission. The United States was the leading contributor, both in terms of military presence and strategic direction. As the primary driver behind the intervention following the September 11 attacks, the U.S. provided the bulk of NATO's troops and resources. American forces led many of the major combat operations and took a central role in counterterrorism efforts, intelligence coordination, and air support. The U.S. also spearheaded efforts to train Afghan security forces and invested heavily in infrastructure and reconstruction projects across the country. The United Kingdom played a crucial role as one of the most committed European allies. British forces were heavily involved in operations in the southern provinces of Afghanistan, particularly Helmand, where some of the fiercest fighting occurred. The UK also took responsibility for mentoring Afghan police forces, contributing to governance efforts, and delivering humanitarian aid. British leadership in both military and diplomatic spheres helped maintain cohesion among NATO forces and ensure coordination across various sectors of the mission. Germany focused its efforts in northern Afghanistan, where it led the provincial reconstruction team in Kunduz and supported regional stability through both military and civil means. German forces concentrated on development, infrastructure, and police training while maintaining security through their military presence. Germany's emphasis on a comprehensive approach to stabilization showcased its commitment to long-term peacebuilding. Canada made a notable contribution, particularly in Kandahar province, one of the most volatile regions in the country. Canadian forces engaged in both combat and reconstruction efforts, often facing significant casualties. Their involvement was vital in supporting NATO's broader mission of counterinsurgency and local governance. Other NATO members, such as Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, and Turkey, also played key roles, providing troops, logistical support, and development assistance. Each of these countries brought distinct strengths to the coalition, whether through medical support, engineering units, or diplomatic engagement with Afghan leaders. Together, the contributions of these member states demonstrated NATO's capacity to operate as a unified coalition in a complex international conflict. Their combined efforts underscored the alliance's commitment to collective security and international cooperation in pursuit of stability in Afghanistan. United States leadership and military contributions. The United States played a central role in NATO's mission in Afghanistan, providing the leadership, military power, and strategic direction that shaped the course of the entire operation. Following the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, the U.S. launched Operation Enduring Freedom to dismantle al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban from power. This action quickly evolved into a broader effort that required sustained international support, leading to NATO's involvement and the establishment of the International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, under U.S. leadership. As the largest troop contributor throughout the mission, the United States committed tens of thousands of soldiers to Afghanistan at the height of the conflict. American forces operated across nearly every region of the country, conducting counterterrorism operations, engaging in large-scale combat missions, and providing critical air and logistical support for NATO allies and Afghan forces. The U.S. military's advanced capabilities, including surveillance, air power, and special operations, proved essential in disrupting insurgent networks and providing security in contested areas. Beyond combat operations, the United States played a significant role in training and mentoring Afghan security forces. Through programs such as the NATO Training Mission Afghanistan, NTMA, American personnel worked closely with the Afghan National Army and Afghan National Police to build their capacity, develop leadership, and instill professional standards. These efforts were central to NATO's long-term goal of enabling Afghanistan to manage its own security. In addition to its military contributions, the United States provided substantial financial and development aid to support Afghanistan's reconstruction. American-led initiatives focused on rebuilding critical infrastructure, improving access to education and healthcare, and fostering economic development. U.S. agencies collaborated with Afghan institutions and international partners to address corruption, promote rule of law, and support the growth of democratic governance. The United States also played a diplomatic leadership role within NATO, coordinating strategic decisions and aligning the goals of member nations. U.S. influence was instrumental in expanding NATO's mandate, adjusting operational strategies, and securing commitments from allies. Washington's ability to mobilize international support underscored its leadership within the alliance and its broader commitment to global security. In sum, the United States' leadership and military contributions were foundational to NATO's mission in Afghanistan. Through its unmatched military presence, commitment to training Afghan forces, and investment in reconstruction, the U.S. not only led the coalition, but also significantly shaped the trajectory and outcomes of the alliance's efforts in the region. United Kingdom and Canada, major combat forces. The United Kingdom and Canada were among NATO's most active and committed contributors during the war in Afghanistan, providing major combat forces and taking on some of the most challenging assignments within the mission. Their involvement demonstrated not only military capability, but also a strong political commitment to NATO's collective goals in the region. Both countries deployed thousands of troops, often to volatile areas where insurgent activity was intense and sustained. The United Kingdom played a leading role in southern Afghanistan, particularly in Helmand Province, one of the most strategically significant and dangerous regions in the country. British forces were heavily engaged in counterinsurgency operations against the Taliban, often facing fierce resistance and operating in difficult terrain. In addition to combat missions, the UK took responsibility for provincial reconstruction teams, which combined military security with development efforts aimed at improving infrastructure, governance, and basic services. British troops were noted for their persistence in high-risk zones, and their presence helped to stabilize key areas while supporting the broader NATO strategy of clearing, holding, and building. Canada's military efforts were similarly focused on the southern region, especially Kandahar Province, a traditional Taliban stronghold. Canadian forces undertook both combat and reconstruction missions, operating under constant threat from improvised explosive devices and insurgent attacks. Despite the heavy toll, Canada remained committed to its role and was recognized for its effectiveness and resolve. Canadian troops also led development initiatives and provided critical support for Afghan civilians, helping to create conditions where local governance could begin to function. Both the United Kingdom and Canada faced significant casualties during their deployments, and their sacrifices underscored the complexity and danger of the mission in Afghanistan. Their commitment went beyond battlefield success, extending into training Afghan forces, partnering with local leaders, and supporting civil society efforts. These nations worked closely with Afghan security forces to improve their capacity and readiness, understanding that lasting stability depended on local leadership and control. Moreover, the political leadership in both countries consistently supported the NATO mission, even as domestic debates emerged over the length and cost of the engagement. Their contributions strengthened NATO's cohesion and demonstrated the alliance's capacity to operate in high-risk environments with unity and resolve. In essence, the United Kingdom and Canada provided more than just combat forces. They brought leadership, resilience, and a dedication to the long-term stabilization of Afghanistan. Their efforts were critical to the operational success of NATO's mission and to the broader international commitment to supporting a post-conflict Afghan state. Germany and France, stability operations and support. Germany and France played vital roles in NATO's mission in Afghanistan, focusing primarily on stability operations and support tasks that complemented the combat efforts of other allies. While their contributions differed in scope and geography, both nations were instrumental in promoting reconstruction, governance, and the long-term development of Afghan institutions. Their presence underscored NATO's multidimensional approach, which required more than military force to achieve sustainable peace. Germany concentrated its efforts in northern Afghanistan, where it led operations in relatively stable regions compared to the volatile south. German forces were responsible for the Regional Command North, headquartered in Mazar-e-Sharif. Their mission centered on providing security for development efforts, mentoring Afghan police units, and supporting civil-military cooperation. Germany's approach prioritized reconstruction and development, placing an emphasis on long-term engagement rather than direct combat. Through provincial reconstruction teams, Germany supported infrastructure projects, healthcare initiatives, and education systems, aiming to build trust among local populations and strengthen state institutions. Training Afghan security forces was another cornerstone of Germany's contribution. German personnel played a significant role in shaping the Afghan National Police, delivering comprehensive training programs and working closely with local authorities to improve the professionalism and effectiveness of law enforcement. This focus on police training complemented broader international efforts to establish rule of law and reduce corruption. France, meanwhile, deployed significant forces to eastern Afghanistan, particularly in and around Kapisa province and the Sorobi district. French troops conducted a mix of combat and support missions, often in areas where insurgent threats were active. In addition to maintaining security and engaging in counterinsurgency operations, France contributed to intelligence sharing, logistics, and aerial support, which enhanced NATO's operational flexibility. French forces also supported development efforts in coordination with civilian agencies and international partners. Their contributions helped stabilize regions prone to insurgent activity, enabling reconstruction efforts to proceed more effectively. Like Germany, France took part in training Afghan forces, although it focused more on the Afghan National Army than on police forces. Both Germany and France demonstrated a strong commitment to NATO's collective objectives, while also adhering to their national strategies, which often emphasized stabilization over combat. Their roles highlighted the importance of non-combat contributions within a military alliance, proving that support and development are essential elements of modern conflict resolution. In summary, Germany and France brought essential capabilities to NATO's mission in Afghanistan. Through stability operations, training initiatives, and reconstruction support, they played a crucial part in fostering conditions for long-term peace and strengthening Afghanistan's capacity to govern itself. Chapter 4: NATO's military operations in Afghanistan. NATO's military operations in Afghanistan were extensive, multifaceted, and evolved significantly over time. Initially centered on toppling the Taliban regime and dismantling terrorist networks, these operations gradually shifted toward counterinsurgency, stabilization, and support for Afghan forces. The scope and complexity of NATO's involvement reflected both the challenges of the Afghan environment and the coalition's long-term goals of securing and rebuilding the country. NATO formally assumed command of the International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, in 2003, marking the alliance's first deployment outside of Europe. ISAF began as a small force tasked with securing Kabul and the surrounding areas, but it expanded rapidly to cover the entire country. As operations moved into the southern and eastern provinces, NATO forces encountered intense resistance from insurgent groups, particularly the Taliban. This phase of operations required high levels of coordination among member states, as well as adaptability to Afghanistan's varied and often difficult terrain. Combat missions under NATO's command targeted insurgent strongholds and aimed to disrupt the Taliban's ability to regroup and control territory. Operations such as Medusa, Mountain Thrust, and Achilles were major offensives designed to clear insurgent fighters from key areas, often involving joint operations with Afghan forces. Air support, special operations, and intelligence sharing were critical in these campaigns, as was the ability to deploy rapid reaction forces to respond to threats. In parallel with direct combat, NATO emphasized a population-centric counterinsurgency strategy. This approach aimed not only to defeat insurgents, but to protect civilians and win the support of local communities. Securing the population, fostering trust, and enabling development became as important as military victories. NATO troops were involved in securing roads, protecting infrastructure, and providing support to humanitarian efforts. These operations often required close cooperation with civilian organizations and the Afghan government. Another key focus of NATO's military operations was the training and mentoring of Afghan security forces. Programs such as the NATO Training Mission Afghanistan, NTMA, worked to build a capable Afghan army and police force, preparing them to eventually take over security responsibilities. By the later years of the mission, NATO began transitioning from a combat role to a support and advisory role under the follow-on Resolute Support Mission, which started in 2015. Overall, NATO's military operations in Afghanistan reflected a blend of traditional combat, counterinsurgency, and capacity-building efforts. The operations demonstrated the alliance's ability to adapt to complex environments and underscored the challenges of modern military interventions in fragile states. Operation Enduring Freedom, the early years. Operation Enduring Freedom, OEF, marked the beginning of the U.S.-led military response to the September 11, 2001 terrorist attacks. Launched on October 7, 2001, OEF aimed to dismantle al-Qaeda, remove the Taliban from power, and prevent Afghanistan from serving as a safe haven for international terrorism. The early years of the operation laid the foundation for what would become a long-term international mission, eventually involving NATO and a broad coalition of allies. The initial phase of OEF was characterized by rapid military success. U.S. forces, working in close coordination with the United Kingdom and supported by local Afghan militias, launched targeted airstrikes and special operations missions that quickly degraded the Taliban's command structure. By December 2001, the Taliban regime had fallen, and key al-Qaeda operatives were either captured, killed, or forced into hiding, primarily in the mountainous regions along the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. During this period, the Northern Alliance, a coalition of Afghan opposition groups, played a pivotal role on the ground, supported by American air power and intelligence. The cooperation between U.S. forces and Afghan fighters allowed for swift territorial gains and the seizure of strategic cities, including Kabul and Kandahar. The military effectiveness of the campaign was bolstered by the relatively limited resistance in many areas, as the Taliban quickly lost control of key strongholds. However, even as initial military objectives were achieved, deeper challenges emerged. The absence of a comprehensive plan for post-conflict stabilization led to a fragile security environment. Insurgent elements, including remnants of the Taliban and newly formed militant networks, began regrouping in rural areas and across the border in Pakistan. These groups would later reemerge as a significant threat, complicating NATO's mission in the years that followed. Politically, the early years of OEF also set the stage for Afghanistan's reconstruction. In December 2001, the Bonn Agreement was signed, initiating a political transition process that led to the establishment of an interim Afghan government under Hamid Karzai. International donors pledged support for rebuilding Afghanistan, and the groundwork was laid for a more coordinated international effort involving NATO. In summary, the early years of Operation Enduring Freedom were marked by swift military victories and the collapse of the Taliban regime. However, the lack of a long-term stabilization plan allowed insurgent forces to regroup, foreshadowing the protracted conflict that would follow. These initial operations created the conditions for NATO's eventual involvement and highlighted the complex relationship between military success and political stability in Afghanistan. Transition to ISAF, International Security Assistance Force. The transition from Operation Enduring Freedom to the International Security Assistance Force, ISAF, represented a critical shift in the international community's approach to the conflict in Afghanistan. While the early years of Operation Enduring Freedom were largely driven by the United States and focused on counterterrorism and toppling the Taliban, the establishment of ISAF marked the beginning of a more structured and multinational effort to stabilize and rebuild the country under the leadership of NATO. ISAF was originally established by the United Nations Security Council in December 2001, following the Bonn Agreement that outlined Afghanistan's political transition. Initially, ISAF's mandate was limited to securing Kabul and its immediate surroundings, allowing the interim Afghan government to operate and begin restoring order. The early iterations of ISAF were led by rotating non-NATO countries, but in 2003, NATO formally assumed command, marking the first time the alliance had taken responsibility for a mission outside of Europe or North America. Under NATO's leadership, ISAF gradually expanded its operations beyond Kabul in several stages. This phased expansion began in the north and west of Afghanistan, then extended into the more volatile southern and eastern regions, where insurgent activity was more intense. The expansion was a response to the increasing need for a coordinated international presence to secure the country, facilitate reconstruction, and support the growing Afghan government. Unlike Operation Enduring Freedom, which maintained a strong focus on direct combat operations, ISAF adopted a broader mandate that emphasized security, governance, and development. NATO member states and partner countries contributed troops, resources, and civilian support to help rebuild Afghan infrastructure and institutions. Provincial reconstruction teams, PRTs, became a central feature of ISAF's efforts, combining military security with humanitarian and development aid. The transition to ISAF also introduced greater coordination among international actors, although it was not without challenges. Differences in national caveats, troop capabilities, and strategic priorities occasionally complicated operations. Nonetheless, ISAF's structure allowed for more unified planning and engagement across the country, providing a foundation for training Afghan security forces and laying the groundwork for eventual Afghan self-reliance. In essence, the transition to ISAF signaled a shift from a unilateral, U.S.-led military campaign to a comprehensive multinational approach focused on long-term stability. It reflected the understanding that defeating insurgency required more than military might. It demanded a sustained commitment to governance, development, and the empowerment of Afghan institutions. This transition shaped the trajectory of NATO's involvement and underscored the importance of collective international action in addressing complex security challenges. Major battles and tactical developments. Throughout NATO's mission in Afghanistan, several major battles and tactical shifts shaped the nature of the conflict and the alliance's approach to combat operations. These engagements were not only pivotal in the broader military campaign, but also illustrated the evolving tactics of both NATO forces and insurgent groups. As the war progressed, NATO had to continuously adapt to the complex terrain, decentralized enemy operations, and the political sensitivities of fighting in a foreign nation. One of the earliest and most significant battles was Operation Medusa in 2006, led primarily by Canadian and British forces in Kandahar province. This large-scale offensive aimed to clear Taliban fighters from the Panjwai district, a strategic stronghold near the Taliban's traditional base of support. The operation showcased NATO's capability to conduct coordinated, high-intensity combat operations involving ground troops, armor, and air support. Despite achieving tactical success, Operation Medusa also highlighted the insurgents' ability to regroup and shift to other areas, underscoring the limitations of conventional victories. Another key engagement was the Battle of Musa Qala in 2007, where British, American, and Afghan forces launched an assault to retake a town that had fallen to the Taliban. This battle marked a turning point in the coordination between Afghan and NATO forces and demonstrated the importance of local alliances. The successful recapture of the town was considered a symbolic victory, but sustaining control of such contested areas remained a persistent challenge. As insurgent tactics evolved, NATO forces increasingly faced asymmetric warfare, including improvised explosive devices, IEDs, ambushes, and complex attacks on convoys and outposts. In response, NATO adapted its tactics to include more intelligence-driven operations, the use of special forces for targeted raids, and increased aerial surveillance using drones. These shifts allowed for more precise strikes against high-value targets and reduced the reliance on large-scale ground offensives. The introduction of the clear, hold, build strategy during General Stanley McChrystal's command in 2009 marked a further evolution in tactics. This counterinsurgency approach aimed to first clear areas of insurgents, then hold them with security forces, and finally build governance and infrastructure. Major operations like Mashtarak in Helmand province applied this model, focusing on gaining the trust of local populations through both military presence and development efforts. In summary, major battles and tactical developments during NATO's time in Afghanistan reflected a dynamic and adaptive conflict. While conventional engagements were critical, long-term success increasingly relied on flexibility, intelligence, and the integration of civilian and military efforts. These experiences profoundly influenced NATO's doctrines and its understanding of modern warfare. Chapter 5: The Civilian and Humanitarian Efforts of NATO. While NATO's military operations in Afghanistan were essential for maintaining security, the alliance's civilian and humanitarian efforts played a critical role in the overall mission. These efforts aimed to stabilize the country, rebuild its infrastructure, and foster conditions conducive to long-term peace and development. NATO's approach involved working alongside international agencies, non-governmental organizations, NGOs, and the Afghan government to address the pressing needs of the population, which had been severely affected by years of conflict. A key aspect of NATO's civilian and humanitarian efforts was the establishment of Provincial Reconstruction Teams, PRTs. These teams were comprised of military personnel, development experts, and diplomats, and they worked in tandem with Afghan authorities to improve governance, facilitate reconstruction, and provide services to local populations. The PRTs were deployed in various provinces across Afghanistan, with each team focusing on specific regional challenges. They helped rebuild vital infrastructure, such as roads, schools, and hospitals, and provided assistance in sectors like agriculture, education, and healthcare. By promoting community-based development projects, NATO sought to address both immediate needs and the longer-term goals of self-sufficiency and stability. In addition to the PRTs, NATO's humanitarian efforts included providing emergency relief in response to natural disasters, such as floods and droughts. The alliance, along with partner countries and organizations, helped deliver food aid, medical supplies, and shelter to displaced populations. These interventions were crucial for alleviating the suffering of those affected by the ongoing conflict and the harsh living conditions in many parts of the country. NATO also focused on promoting human rights, gender equality, and social development in Afghanistan. By supporting programs aimed at protecting women and children, the alliance helped to raise awareness of human rights issues and supported the establishment of legal frameworks designed to protect vulnerable groups. Programs in education, particularly for girls, were prioritized to ensure that future generations had access to opportunities for growth and development. While NATO's humanitarian efforts were substantial, they faced significant challenges. The security situation in many areas, particularly in the South and East, made it difficult to access some communities and deliver aid effectively. Additionally, the complex relationship between military operations and humanitarian assistance sometimes led to tensions, with some local populations perceiving aid workers as associated with foreign military forces. Overall, NATO's civilian and humanitarian efforts were critical to Afghanistan's reconstruction process. While security challenges persisted, these efforts helped to create conditions for recovery and laid the groundwork for a more stable and prosperous future for the Afghan people. Rebuilding infrastructure in Afghanistan. Rebuilding Afghanistan's infrastructure was one of the most challenging and vital aspects of NATO's mission. Years of war had left the country's infrastructure in ruins, and a comprehensive effort was needed to restore basic services and facilitate long-term economic growth. NATO, in coordination with international organizations, the Afghan government, and private contractors, focused on rebuilding roads, bridges, schools, hospitals, and power grids, all of which were essential to the country's recovery. One of the first priorities in rebuilding efforts was the restoration of transportation networks. Afghanistan's roads and bridges had been extensively damaged by decades of conflict, making it difficult to move goods, services, and people across the country. NATO played a significant role in rehabilitating key roads, such as the Kabul-Kandahar Highway, which connected major cities and facilitated the movement of military and humanitarian aid. Restoring these routes was also critical for enabling trade and improving access to markets for local populations. The rehabilitation of bridges and the construction of new ones further improved transportation, linking isolated regions with urban centers. In addition to transportation, the restoration of basic utilities was a key priority. Electricity infrastructure had been severely damaged, and many areas of Afghanistan had little to no access to reliable power. NATO, working with other international partners, helped rebuild the country's electrical grid, including the construction of new power plants and the repair of transmission lines. These efforts brought electricity to previously underserved regions and provided a foundation for industrial development and improved living standards. NATO also contributed to rebuilding Afghanistan's educational infrastructure. Many schools had been destroyed or were in disrepair, limiting access to education for Afghan children. New schools were built, and existing ones were repaired, often with a focus on creating safe environments for female students. Educational programs were expanded, with an emphasis on training teachers and improving the quality of education across the country. These efforts were seen as critical for breaking the cycle of poverty and enabling future generations to contribute to the country's growth. Healthcare infrastructure was similarly devastated by the conflict, with many hospitals and clinics inoperative or under-equipped. NATO and its partners assisted in rebuilding healthcare facilities, providing medical supplies, and supporting training programs for Afghan healthcare workers. These initiatives improved access to medical care, particularly in rural areas, and helped strengthen the Afghan health system. While significant progress was made in rebuilding Afghanistan's infrastructure, the challenges were immense. Security concerns, limited resources, and political instability often hindered the effectiveness and sustainability of reconstruction projects. Nonetheless, NATO's efforts in infrastructure rebuilding laid the foundation for Afghanistan's recovery and provided essential services to its population, contributing to long-term stability. Human rights and women's empowerment programs. Human rights and women's empowerment were central to NATO's civilian and humanitarian efforts in Afghanistan. The country had a history of severe human rights violations, especially under Taliban rule, which suppressed women's rights and freedoms. With the fall of the Taliban regime and NATO's involvement in Afghanistan, there was an opportunity to rebuild Afghan society on the foundations of human rights, gender equality, and social justice. NATO, in collaboration with international organizations, local authorities, and NGOs, focused on programs designed to protect human rights and empower women in a post-conflict environment. One of the key areas of focus for NATO was ensuring that women had access to education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. Before the fall of the Taliban, women's access to education was severely restricted, and many girls were denied schooling altogether. NATO's programs sought to reverse this trend by rebuilding schools, particularly for girls, and ensuring that education became accessible to all Afghan children, regardless of gender. Many new educational institutions were established, and existing ones were repaired, with special attention given to creating safe spaces for female students. Additionally, training programs were implemented to improve the quality of education and empower women as teachers and community leaders. Women's health was another critical area of focus. The healthcare system in Afghanistan was badly damaged, with limited access to medical care, particularly for women and children. NATO supported the rebuilding of hospitals and clinics, especially those focusing on maternal and child health. Health programs included improving access to family planning, prenatal care, and reproductive health services, which were vital for reducing maternal mortality rates in the country. The emphasis on women's health care also extended to training female doctors and healthcare providers, enabling Afghan women to take active roles in the medical field. Women's economic empowerment was also a priority. Many Afghan women had limited access to employment opportunities due to cultural norms and the previous regime's policies. NATO's programs aimed to break down barriers to female participation in the workforce by providing training in skills development, vocational education, and entrepreneurship. This helped Afghan women gain financial independence and become active contributors to their families and communities. In addition to these direct programs, NATO supported the strengthening of legal frameworks to protect women's rights. This included advocating for laws against domestic violence, child marriage, and gender-based violence, as well as promoting women's participation in political and decision-making processes. These efforts aim to create a more inclusive society where women could have a voice in shaping the country's future. While challenges remained, particularly in rural areas, NATO's focus on human rights and women's empowerment contributed to significant progress in advancing gender equality and social justice in Afghanistan. These programs were crucial in laying the groundwork for a more equitable society, offering Afghan women opportunities for education, healthcare, and economic independence. Collaboration with international aid organizations. NATO's mission in Afghanistan was not only a military endeavor, but also a comprehensive effort to support the country's recovery and development. Central to this effort was NATO's collaboration with international aid organizations, which played a crucial role in the country's rebuilding process. These organizations, including the United Nations, the World Bank, and numerous non-governmental organizations, NGOs, worked alongside NATO to provide essential humanitarian assistance, development support, and capacity-building initiatives in various sectors. One of the key areas where NATO and international aid organizations collaborated was in providing emergency humanitarian assistance. Afghanistan faced numerous challenges, including widespread poverty, food insecurity, and lack of access to health care. With the country's infrastructure severely damaged by years of conflict, international aid organizations were instrumental in delivering food aid, medical supplies, and other critical resources to affected populations. NATO, while maintaining its security responsibilities, facilitated the delivery of aid by providing protection and security for convoys, enabling these organizations to reach remote and unstable regions of the country. In addition to immediate humanitarian relief, NATO's collaboration with aid organizations focused on long-term development goals. Reconstruction efforts were coordinated with various agencies to rebuild key infrastructure, such as roads, schools, and healthcare facilities. These efforts were vital for restoring basic services and improving the standard of living for ordinary Afghan citizens. International organizations also played a key role in supporting the development of local governance structures, training Afghan civil servants, and promoting the rule of law. NATO's role in this context was to provide a secure environment that allowed aid organizations to carry out their work effectively. Moreover, international aid organizations contributed significantly to education and healthcare programs. While NATO supported the rebuilding of schools and hospitals, these organizations provided expertise and resources to improve education and health outcomes. This included the development of programs to train teachers and healthcare workers, particularly women, to build the capacity of Afghanistan's local workforce. By collaborating with NGOs and international agencies, NATO helped foster the creation of a sustainable, self-reliant Afghan society. Despite the complexities of working in a conflict zone, the partnership between NATO and international aid organizations proved to be essential for the overall success of Afghanistan's reconstruction. While challenges, such as security threats and logistical difficulties, persisted, the collaboration helped to create a foundation for long-term stability and development. The joint efforts of NATO and these organizations not only supported immediate humanitarian needs, but also laid the groundwork for Afghanistan's future recovery. Chapter 6: Challenges Faced by NATO in Afghanistan. NATO's involvement in Afghanistan, while significant in terms of its military and humanitarian contributions, was fraught with numerous challenges that complicated its mission and efforts. These challenges were multifaceted, ranging from the unpredictable security environment to the complex political and cultural landscape. Understanding these obstacles is crucial in assessing NATO's overall impact in Afghanistan. One of the primary challenges NATO faced was the persistent insurgency, primarily led by the Taliban. Despite initial successes in toppling the Taliban regime and dismantling terrorist networks, NATO forces struggled to maintain control over large parts of the country. The insurgents employed unconventional tactics, such as improvised explosive devices, IEDs, ambushes, and asymmetric warfare, which caused significant casualties and made it difficult for NATO to secure key regions. The resilience of the Taliban and the spread of insurgent influence in rural areas required NATO to constantly adapt its military strategies, which at times stretched the capabilities of the alliance. The terrain and geography of Afghanistan posed additional challenges. The rugged mountains, vast deserts, and remote areas made logistics and troop movements extremely difficult. Poor infrastructure and harsh weather conditions further complicated NATO's operations, especially in rural regions where security forces had limited reach. The difficult terrain also contributed to the problem of ensuring the safety of supply chains and providing humanitarian aid to communities in need. Another significant challenge was the complex political and cultural environment in Afghanistan. NATO forces had to navigate a fragmented political landscape, with regional warlords, tribal factions, and ethnic groups holding varying degrees of influence. Building effective relationships with the Afghan government proved difficult, as political instability and corruption plagued the country. NATO's efforts to foster governance and rule of law were often hindered by local power dynamics and the slow pace of institutional reform. The issue of civilian casualties and collateral damage further complicated NATO's mission. In a counterinsurgency environment where the enemy often hid among civilian populations, distinguishing between combatants and non-combatants was challenging. Civilian casualties resulting from airstrikes or ground operations led to negative perceptions of NATO among local populations and fueled insurgent propaganda, making it harder to win hearts and minds. Finally, The burden of public opinion in NATO member countries added an additional layer of complexity. As the conflict dragged on, public support for the mission began to wane, especially as casualties mounted and the goals of the mission appeared unclear. Political pressure to withdraw troops and reassess the mission led to changes in strategy and the eventual transition from combat operations to a more advisory and support role. In conclusion, NATO's mission in Afghanistan was marked by numerous challenges, from the enduring insurgency and difficult terrain to political instability and public opinion. These obstacles tested the alliance's ability to adapt and achieve its objectives, and while significant progress was made, the difficulties faced highlight the complexities of modern military interventions in conflict zones. Complex terrain and geography. One of the most significant challenges NATO faced in Afghanistan was the country's complex terrain and geography. Afghanistan's landscape is characterized by rugged mountains, vast deserts, and remote areas, which created a myriad of difficulties for military operations, logistics, and humanitarian efforts. The geographical features of Afghanistan not only influenced tactical decisions on the battlefield, but also had profound implications for the overall success of NATO's mission. The mountainous terrain, particularly in the eastern and southern regions, provided ideal hiding spots for insurgents, making it difficult for NATO forces to establish control over these areas. The terrain allowed the Taliban and other militant groups to use guerrilla tactics effectively, such as ambushes and hit-and-run attacks. These mountains also made it challenging to secure supply routes, with convoys frequently vulnerable to attacks by insurgents. NATO forces had to rely on specialized mountain warfare tactics and equipment to navigate these areas, and even then, their mobility was often limited. In addition to mountains, Afghanistan's vast desert regions posed their own set of challenges. Many of these areas were sparsely populated and lacked the infrastructure needed to support military operations or humanitarian aid distribution. NATO forces had to work with limited resources when operating in these vast open spaces, and the harsh weather conditions, extremely hot summers and bitterly cold winters, further complicated logistical efforts. The desert terrain also created difficulties in maintaining secure lines of communication and ensuring that essential supplies could reach remote areas. The lack of infrastructure throughout much of the country further compounded the challenges of Afghanistan's geography. Roads and bridges were often damaged or non-existent, making it difficult for NATO forces to maintain mobility and for aid organizations to deliver essential supplies to isolated communities. Rebuilding infrastructure in such a challenging environment required extensive planning and coordination between NATO, the Afghan government, and international aid organizations. Even with these efforts, many regions remained inaccessible for long periods due to the deteriorated state of the infrastructure. The geography also had significant implications for NATO's efforts to win the support of the Afghan population. In rural areas, where the influence of the central government was minimal, insurgents could blend in with local communities, making it difficult for NATO forces to distinguish between combatants and civilians. This made the task of securing and rebuilding these regions even more complex, as NATO had to balance military objectives with the need to protect civilian populations. In conclusion, the complex terrain and geography of Afghanistan played a critical role in shaping the nature of NATO's mission. The country's mountains, deserts, and lack of infrastructure created significant challenges for both military operations and humanitarian efforts, requiring NATO to adapt its strategies and tactics to navigate the harsh environment. These geographical obstacles were among the many factors that made Afghanistan one of the most difficult environments for international military intervention. Cultural and political barriers. NATO's mission in Afghanistan faced numerous challenges rooted in the country's complex cultural and political landscape. The combination of these barriers complicated military operations, the rebuilding process, and efforts to win the support of the Afghan population. Understanding and navigating these cultural and political challenges was essential to NATO's ability to succeed in Afghanistan, but overcoming them proved to be a difficult task. Culturally, Afghanistan is a highly diverse country, home to a variety of ethnic groups, languages, and traditions. The Pashtuns, Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks, and other ethnic communities each have their own distinct customs and histories. NATO forces, composed of soldiers from many different countries, had to contend with this cultural diversity, which influenced both local politics and the broader security situation. In many regions, loyalty to ethnic or tribal groups often outweighed allegiance to the central government, leading to fragmented support for NATO and the Afghan authorities. This fragmentation made it difficult for NATO to build a cohesive strategy for unifying the country and gaining the trust of local populations. The deep-seated tribal and regional rivalries further complicated NATO's efforts. Warlords and local leaders wielded significant power, especially in rural areas, and often prioritized their own interests over national unity. NATO's attempts to build a strong central government in Kabul were frequently undermined by these local power brokers, who resisted central authority and often operated outside the rule of law. This dynamic made it challenging for NATO to establish effective governance and promote political stability across the country. Politically, Afghanistan faced significant instability, with corruption and weak governance structures hampering the progress of reforms. The Afghan government, despite NATO's support, struggled to assert its authority over many regions, and the level of corruption within the government further eroded public trust. NATO's efforts to train Afghan security forces and build governance capacity were constantly undermined by the lack of political will and resources. This, in turn, made it difficult for NATO to hand over security responsibilities to Afghan forces, as they were not fully prepared to handle the country's complex security challenges. The presence of foreign troops in Afghanistan also fueled resentment among segments of the population. Many Afghans viewed NATO as an occupying force, particularly as civilian casualties from military operations mounted. This perception was exacerbated by cultural misunderstandings between NATO forces and local populations. NATO soldiers often struggled to grasp the social norms, customs, and traditions of Afghan communities, leading to friction and mistrust. In conclusion, the cultural and political barriers in Afghanistan were significant obstacles to NATO's mission. The country's ethnic divisions, local power structures, corruption, and political instability created a challenging environment for NATO forces, complicating efforts to rebuild the nation and establish lasting peace. Understanding and overcoming these barriers was essential, but it proved to be one of the most difficult aspects of NATO's intervention in Afghanistan. Dealing with corruption and government instability. Corruption and government instability were among the most significant challenges that NATO faced during its mission in Afghanistan. These issues not only hindered the progress of the rebuilding efforts, but also undermined the legitimacy of the Afghan government and affected the overall effectiveness of NATO's operations. Despite NATO's support and its efforts to promote good governance, Afghanistan's deeply ingrained corruption and political instability created significant obstacles. Corruption within the Afghan government was pervasive at nearly every level, from local officials to high-ranking leaders. The system of patronage, where positions of power were often awarded based on tribal affiliations or political connections rather than merit, contributed to a lack of accountability and transparency. This widespread corruption prevented the effective allocation of resources, undermined the delivery of essential services, and fueled resentment among the Afghan population. In many cases, aid meant to support reconstruction and development projects was siphoned off, which hindered the progress of NATO's efforts to rebuild Afghanistan's infrastructure and institutions. The problem of corruption was exacerbated by the weak judicial and law enforcement systems in the country. The lack of a functioning rule of law meant that many individuals involved in corrupt activities faced little to no consequences. This further discouraged foreign investment and international aid, as donors and organizations were wary of the potential for their resources to be misappropriated. NATO's initiatives aimed at building Afghan institutions were often slowed down or compromised by the very individuals who were supposed to benefit from these reforms. Government instability also played a crucial role in limiting NATO's success in Afghanistan. The political landscape was marked by frequent power struggles, shifting alliances, and a lack of cohesive leadership. The central government in Kabul was often unable to assert its authority over vast swaths of the country, with warlords and tribal leaders exerting significant control in the provinces. These local power brokers often resisted the Afghan government's attempts to centralize power, further contributing to the fragmentation of the country. The lack of political unity within Afghanistan made it difficult for NATO to establish a stable, functional government that could take over security responsibilities. Efforts to reform the Afghan police and military were frequently hampered by corruption within the ranks, which prevented them from becoming fully effective in maintaining law and order. This instability not only prolonged the conflict, but also contributed to NATO's difficult task of transitioning from combat operations to a more supportive role. In conclusion, corruption and government instability were significant barriers that NATO had to navigate during its mission in Afghanistan. The lack of effective governance, coupled with widespread corruption, undermined the progress of the mission and made it difficult for NATO to achieve its long-term objectives. Despite these challenges, NATO's commitment to rebuilding Afghanistan's institutions and supporting the Afghan government was crucial to the country's recovery, even though the road to stability remained long and fraught with difficulties. Chapter 7: Relations with Afghan Forces and Local Populations. The relationship between NATO forces, Afghan security forces, and local populations played a crucial role in the success or failure of the alliance's mission in Afghanistan. These relationships were often complex and shaped by a variety of factors, including cultural differences, local power dynamics, and the evolving political and security situation. NATO's ability to collaborate effectively with Afghan forces and gain the trust of local populations was essential to achieving its objectives of stabilization, counterinsurgency, and nation-building. NATO's relationship with Afghan security forces, particularly the Afghan National Army, ANA, and Afghan National Police, ANP, was one of the central pillars of the alliance's strategy. One of NATO's key goals was to train, mentor, and equip Afghan forces so they could eventually take over the responsibility for the country's security. However, building a professional and capable Afghan military was no simple task. Afghan forces were plagued by issues such as corruption, illiteracy, and a lack of training. NATO's training programs, such as the NATO Training Mission Afghanistan, NTMA, aimed to address these challenges, but the progress was slow and often hindered by internal political instability and inadequate resources. Despite these challenges, by the later years of NATO's mission, Afghan forces had gained a greater degree of operational competence, though they still faced significant obstacles in maintaining security in the face of a resilient insurgency. Another important aspect of NATO's efforts in Afghanistan was its relationship with local populations. Winning the hearts and minds of the Afghan people was seen as a critical component of NATO's counterinsurgency strategy. The goal was to gain the trust of local communities, reduce their support for insurgents, and help stabilize the country. However, this task was made difficult by several factors, including cultural misunderstandings, the presence of foreign troops, and the insurgents' ability to blend into civilian populations. Civilians often found themselves caught in the crossfire, and civilian casualties resulting from military operations sometimes led to resentment and distrust of NATO forces. This undermined efforts to build goodwill and created challenges in establishing lasting peace. Furthermore, local power structures, such as tribal leaders and warlords, had a significant impact on NATO's ability to influence the population. While some of these local leaders cooperated with NATO forces, others were resistant or outright hostile, complicating NATO's efforts to establish a unified Afghan government and a stable security environment. The alliance's success was often dependent on navigating these local power dynamics and working with various factions, which at times led to difficult compromises. In conclusion, NATO's relations with Afghan forces and local populations were central to the success of its mission. While progress was made in training Afghan security forces and engaging with local communities, challenges such as cultural differences, political fragmentation, and the ongoing insurgency complicated these efforts. NATO's ability to navigate these relationships and foster cooperation was essential to the long-term stability of Afghanistan, though many of these challenges continued to affect the mission throughout its duration. Training and supporting Afghan security forces. One of NATO's key objectives in Afghanistan was to build and strengthen the Afghan National Army, ANA, and the Afghan National Police, ANP, enabling them to take over security responsibilities from international forces. This effort was central to the long-term goal of stabilizing Afghanistan and ensuring that the country could defend itself against insurgents and maintain internal security. However, training and supporting Afghan security forces proved to be a complex and challenging task, influenced by a range of factors, including resource limitations, cultural differences, and the instability of the Afghan government. The NATO Training Mission Afghanistan, NTMA, launched in 2009, was designed to build the capacity of Afghan security forces by providing training, mentorship, and logistical support. The mission focused on improving the operational capabilities of the ANA and ANP, addressing issues such as combat readiness, tactical skills, and leadership. NATO also aimed to create a professional and sustainable security force that could operate independently once international forces began to withdraw. This involved not only training soldiers and police officers, but also providing guidance on discipline, ethics, and human rights, crucial aspects for ensuring the legitimacy of Afghan security forces in the eyes of the population. Despite these efforts, the challenges of training Afghan forces were significant. One of the key obstacles was the lack of a solid educational foundation among many recruits, especially in the ANA. High illiteracy rates, limited formal education, and low levels of professional training made it difficult for Afghan soldiers to grasp the complexities of modern warfare and security operations. NATO's training programs had to adapt to these realities, incorporating basic literacy programs and using more hands-on training methods to ensure that Afghan forces could develop the necessary skills to respond to the insurgency. Another challenge was the high levels of corruption within the Afghan security forces. Corruption not only affected recruitment and promotions, but also led to a lack of accountability and discipline. This undermined the effectiveness of the ANA and ANP, making it difficult for them to operate independently and earn the trust of the Afghan population. NATO worked closely with Afghan authorities to address these issues, but progress was slow and corruption remained a persistent problem throughout the mission. Additionally, Afghan security forces were often under-equipped and lacked sufficient logistical support. While NATO provided critical supplies, including weapons, vehicles, and training materials, the sustainability of these resources was often in question, given Afghanistan's limited infrastructure and challenging terrain. NATO's logistical support was vital, but could only go so far in ensuring the long-term capability of Afghan forces. In conclusion, training and supporting Afghan security forces was a cornerstone of NATO's mission in Afghanistan. Despite significant challenges, NATO succeeded in building a more capable and self-reliant security apparatus over time. However, issues like corruption, illiteracy, and logistical constraints made it clear that the process of developing a fully independent Afghan security force would be a long-term endeavor, requiring sustained efforts even after NATO's withdrawal. The role of Afghan civilians in the conflict. Afghan civilians played a crucial and often complex role in the conflict in Afghanistan, with their involvement shaping both the dynamics of the war and the outcome of NATO's mission. As non-combatants, they were not only caught in the crossfire of military operations, but also impacted by the broader socio-political landscape created by the insurgency, foreign intervention, and internal power struggles. Understanding the role of Afghan civilians is essential for comprehending the challenges faced by NATO in its efforts to stabilize the country. On one hand, many civilians were victims of the conflict. The ongoing war between NATO forces and insurgents, particularly the Taliban, often led to civilian casualties from both direct military operations and bombings. Despite NATO's efforts to minimize civilian harm through precision strikes and strict rules of engagement, the insurgents' use of civilian areas as shields and their tendency to blend into the local population made it difficult to avoid collateral damage. This led to significant resentment among the Afghan population, as many civilians found themselves caught between two opposing forces, neither of which they fully supported. On the other hand, civilians also played an active role in the conflict, sometimes unintentionally and other times more directly. For example, certain tribal and ethnic groups aligned themselves with insurgent factions, either due to shared cultural ties or as a response to perceived injustices by the central government or NATO forces. In rural areas, where tribal and local leaders held significant sway, support for insurgents was often a result of frustration with the government or foreign presence. Additionally, some civilians were coerced by the insurgents to participate in attacks, smuggling, or providing intelligence, which further complicated the efforts of NATO and Afghan forces to win the support of the population. Conversely, many Afghan civilians supported NATO's mission, particularly in areas where insurgent groups had gained significant control. Local communities often welcomed NATO's protection against the Taliban's harsh rule, which included the imposition of strict interpretations of Islamic law, forced recruitment of young men, and violent reprisals against perceived enemies. NATO's counterinsurgency strategy aimed to gain the trust of these civilians by providing security, infrastructure, and development aid, all of which were seen as positive contributions in areas that had long been neglected by the government. Despite the ongoing challenges, civilians remained the central figure in the battle for Afghanistan's future. NATO recognized that securing civilian support was essential to the success of its mission. Winning the hearts and minds of Afghan civilians was a cornerstone of NATO's counterinsurgency strategy, as local support was key to weakening insurgent influence and ensuring long-term stability. In conclusion, Afghan civilians played a multifaceted role in the conflict, being both victims and active participants. Their attitudes and actions influenced the progress of NATO's mission, and their ability to align with either the insurgents or the Afghan government often determined the success or failure of military and political strategies. Understanding the complexities of their involvement was crucial for NATO in navigating the intricate dynamics of the Afghan conflict. NATO's influence on Afghan governance. NATO's involvement in Afghanistan went beyond military operations. It played a significant role in shaping the country's governance structures, helping to rebuild institutions and support the establishment of a stable, democratic system. However, NATO's influence on Afghan governance was complex and multifaceted, marked by both successes and challenges. The alliance's efforts focused on strengthening the Afghan government, promoting democratic processes, and fostering good governance, but these initiatives often faced significant obstacles. One of NATO's primary objectives was to assist in the creation of a functioning, accountable government that could maintain security, provide public services, and ensure the rule of law. To achieve this, NATO supported the Afghan government's institutions through capacity-building programs. These programs included training Afghan civil servants, providing technical assistance, and helping to establish basic government functions such as tax collection, infrastructure development, and law enforcement. NATO's influence was also evident in the establishment of a national security framework, including the Afghan National Army, ANA, and the Afghan National Police, ANP, which were essential for maintaining internal security. Despite these efforts, Afghanistan's political system faced significant challenges, many of which NATO had limited ability to address. Corruption was rampant within the Afghan government, and political instability often undermined the effectiveness of governance reforms. Power struggles between the central government and regional warlords, along with ethnic and tribal divisions, created a fragmented political landscape. NATO's efforts to centralize authority often clashed with local power structures, which were deeply entrenched in Afghanistan's social fabric. In many areas, local leaders had more influence than the central government, making it difficult for NATO and the Afghan government to enforce policies or secure lasting support from the population. Furthermore, NATO's support for democratic processes, such as elections, was an important aspect of its governance efforts. The alliance helped organize and oversee Afghanistan's first post-Taliban elections in 2004 and subsequent elections, aiming to promote a legitimate, representative government. However, these elections were often marred by allegations of fraud, and the political process itself was hindered by insecurity and a lack of infrastructure. As a result, many Afghans remained skeptical about the efficacy of the political system, which diminished the legitimacy of the government in the eyes of the population. In conclusion, NATO's influence on Afghan governance was a crucial part of its broader mission to stabilize the country. While the alliance made notable strides in supporting the development of institutions, promoting democratic processes, and addressing key governance issues, it faced persistent challenges such as corruption, political fragmentation, and a lack of centralized authority. These obstacles ultimately complicated NATO's efforts to establish a sustainable and an effective Afghan government. Chapter 8: NATO's Legacy in Afghanistan and Lessons Learned. NATO's mission in Afghanistan, spanning nearly 2 decades, has left a complex and multifaceted legacy. As the longest military engagement in the alliance's history, it offers a mix of achievements and challenges that provide valuable lessons for future international interventions. NATO's legacy in Afghanistan is defined not only by its military operations, but also by its efforts in nation-building, counterinsurgency, and humanitarian assistance. One of the key aspects of NATO's legacy is the development of Afghan security forces. Over the course of the mission, NATO worked extensively to train and equip the Afghan National Army, ANA, and Afghan National Police, ANP, with the goal of enabling them to take over the responsibility for national security. While Afghan forces have made notable progress, their ability to operate independently remains limited by issues such as corruption, insufficient resources, and challenges in maintaining cohesion across ethnic and regional divides. These difficulties highlight the importance of long-term commitment and sustainable support when building security forces in fragile states. NATO's efforts to build Afghan governance institutions were another significant aspect of its mission. The alliance supported the creation of democratic structures, the establishment of a functioning government, and the promotion of human rights and rule of law. However, the pervasive corruption within the Afghan government and the political fragmentation of the country created a system that was often ineffective and lacked legitimacy in the eyes of many Afghans. NATO's experience in Afghanistan underscores the difficulty of fostering good governance in a post-conflict society where political institutions are weak and deeply influenced by local power structures. Perhaps the most important lesson from NATO's experience in Afghanistan is the challenge of navigating complex political and cultural landscapes. The alliance's efforts to win the hearts and minds of the Afghan population were often undermined by misunderstandings, cultural differences, and a perception of foreign occupation. NATO's counterinsurgency strategy, which focused on securing the population, faced significant resistance from insurgent groups, making it difficult to gain the trust and cooperation of local communities. This highlights the need for cultural sensitivity and a deeper understanding of local dynamics when engaging in military interventions. Finally, NATO's withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 and the subsequent return of the Taliban to power exposed the limits of the alliance's long-term impact. Despite years of investment and efforts to build a stable Afghan government, the collapse of the Afghan state highlighted the challenges of achieving lasting change in conflict-prone regions. This underscores the importance of realistic expectations and a comprehensive, multifaceted approach to peacebuilding, one that combines military, political, and socioeconomic efforts to ensure long-term stability. In conclusion, NATO's legacy in Afghanistan is marked by both successes and failures. While significant strides were made in security sector reform, governance, and humanitarian assistance, the mission's ultimate outcome underscores the complexity of nation building in a fragile, conflict-ridden environment. The lessons learned from NATO's involvement in Afghanistan will shape future international interventions and inform strategies for addressing similar challenges in other parts of the world. Assessing NATO's successes and failures. NATO's involvement in Afghanistan is a story of both significant successes and notable failures, which together offer a complex view of the challenges of international intervention. As the alliance's longest military engagement, its efforts spanned nearly 2 decades, during which it sought to stabilize Afghanistan, defeat insurgent groups, and support nation building. However, despite several achievements, NATO's mission in Afghanistan faced profound limitations that led to a mixed legacy. One of NATO's key successes was the training and development of Afghan security forces. Over the years, NATO invested substantial resources into building the capacity of the Afghan National Army, ANA, and Afghan National Police, AMP. By 2014, NATO forces transitioned to a training and advisory role, leaving the Afghan forces to take on primary responsibility for national security. While these forces face significant challenges in terms of cohesion, resources, and morale, NATO's efforts undoubtedly strengthened Afghanistan's security apparatus. However, the ultimate collapse of the Afghan government and the rapid return of the Taliban in 2021 exposed the weaknesses of these institutions and the lack of long-term sustainability in Afghanistan's security sector. Another success was the improvement of infrastructure and the delivery of humanitarian aid. NATO's stabilization efforts included the construction of roads, schools, and hospitals, as well as support for economic development. These initiatives contributed to some improvements in the quality of life for Afghan civilians, particularly in urban areas. Furthermore, NATO's role in addressing public health issues and providing humanitarian assistance helped alleviate some of the hardships caused by decades of conflict. However, these gains were uneven, with many rural areas continuing to suffer from instability and lack of access to essential services. On the other hand, NATO's failures are also significant. One of the most glaring was the inability to fully eradicate the Taliban insurgency or establish a stable, functioning government. Despite numerous military operations and extensive support for Afghan governance, the Taliban managed to regain strength, ultimately seizing control of the country in 2021. This failure highlights the challenges of military interventions in regions where insurgent groups are deeply rooted in local culture and politics. Furthermore, NATO's efforts to promote good governance were often undermined by rampant corruption within the Afghan government, which eroded public trust and hindered effective governance. The alliance's support for elections and democratic processes, while commendable, also faced challenges, including fraud, political infighting, and a lack of inclusivity. In conclusion, NATO's successes in Afghanistan were tempered by significant challenges and failures. While it contributed to the development of Afghan security forces, infrastructure, and some aspects of governance, it ultimately struggled to achieve its overarching goals of lasting stability and peace. The lessons learned from NATO's involvement in Afghanistan will shape future military interventions, emphasizing the need for realistic objectives, a deep understanding of local dynamics, and long-term commitment to peacebuilding. The future of NATO's role in global conflicts. As NATO continues to evolve in response to the shifting dynamics of global security, its role in future conflicts will be shaped by both new challenges and lessons learned from past engagements. The alliance's involvement in Afghanistan, along with its ongoing operations in other regions, offers valuable insights into the evolving nature of military interventions and international collaboration. Moving forward, NATO will likely play a more complex and multifaceted role in global conflicts, balancing traditional military operations with diplomacy, peacebuilding, and the promotion of stability. One of the key aspects of NATO's future role will be its ability to adapt to the growing threats posed by hybrid warfare, cyber attacks, and non-state actors. As adversaries increasingly employ unconventional tactics, such as cyber warfare and disinformation campaigns, NATO will need to enhance its capacity to counter these new threats. This may involve strengthening its cyber defense capabilities, improving intelligence sharing mechanisms, and enhancing its ability to respond quickly to emerging crises in a highly interconnected and technologically advanced world. Another important aspect of NATO's future role will be its focus on cooperative security and partnerships with other international organizations, such as the United Nations and the European Union. The alliance will likely continue to play a pivotal role in crisis management, but it may increasingly operate in conjunction with civilian actors to address the underlying causes of conflict, such as poverty, political instability, and human rights abuses. In this context, NATO's military capabilities will be complemented by diplomatic efforts and development assistance, aiming to create long-term stability in conflict-prone regions. Furthermore, NATO's future involvement in global conflicts may shift toward more flexible and rapid response missions, particularly in regions where traditional peacekeeping operations are not feasible. The alliance will need to maintain its ability to quickly deploy forces to respond to crises, while also emphasizing the importance of preventing conflict through early warning systems and proactive diplomatic engagement. This may involve increased cooperation with local governments and regional organizations to address security concerns before they escalate into full-scale conflicts. In conclusion, NATO's future role in global conflicts will require a balance between military strength and diplomatic engagement. As the security landscape continues to evolve, the alliance must adapt to new threats and challenges while remaining committed to its foundational principles of collective defense, crisis management, and global stability. By learning from past experiences and embracing new approaches to conflict resolution, NATO can continue to play a vital role in promoting peace and security worldwide. Reflections on coalition warfare and international cooperation. Coalition warfare and international cooperation have become central elements of modern military strategy, as evidenced by NATO's involvement in Afghanistan. The complexities of global conflicts demand that nations work together to address shared security concerns, pooling resources, capabilities, and expertise. The experience in Afghanistan highlighted both the strengths and challenges of coalition warfare, offering valuable lessons for future international military collaborations. One of the key advantages of coalition warfare is the ability to leverage the collective strength of diverse nations. NATO's multinational composition allowed the alliance to combine different military capabilities, technological resources, and logistical support, enhancing its overall effectiveness in the field. By drawing from a broad spectrum of expertise, NATO was able to address a wide range of operational challenges, from high-intensity combat to humanitarian assistance. This diversity also provided an opportunity for member states to share best practices and learn from one another's experiences. However, coalition warfare also presents unique challenges. The integration of forces from different countries often involves navigating varying national interests, political agendas, and military cultures. In Afghanistan, for example, different NATO countries had differing rules of engagement, operational priorities, and levels of commitment. These differences sometimes led to friction and difficulties in coordinating operations, complicating efforts to maintain a unified strategy. The ability to align diverse perspectives and achieve consensus among coalition partners is essential for success, yet it is often a complex and time-consuming process. The experience in Afghanistan also underscored the importance of clear communication and effective leadership within coalitions. A lack of coordination can result in operational inefficiencies, wasted resources, and missed opportunities. In some instances, NATO's military command structure faced challenges in synchronizing efforts between different units and countries. Effective communication and strong leadership are crucial in ensuring that all coalition members are working toward the same objectives and that operational goals are met efficiently. Another important lesson from coalition warfare is the need for long-term commitment and cooperation beyond the battlefield. Military success alone is not sufficient to achieve lasting stability in conflict zones. NATO's efforts in Afghanistan extended beyond combat operations to include nation-building, humanitarian assistance, and support for governance. The commitment of coalition partners to these efforts was vital to achieving the alliance's broader objectives. However, the ultimate challenge remains: how to maintain cohesion and momentum in long-term engagements where success is often difficult to measure and public support may wane over time. In conclusion, coalition warfare and international cooperation are essential for addressing contemporary global security challenges. The experiences from NATO's mission in Afghanistan highlight both the potential and the difficulties of working together in multinational military coalitions. Future operations will benefit from these lessons as nations continue to refine their approaches to collaboration, leadership, and strategy in the pursuit of peace and stability. Conclusion. NATO's involvement in Afghanistan was a defining chapter in the alliance's history, marked by both triumphs and challenges. The mission, which spanned nearly 2 decades, highlighted the complexities of modern warfare, international cooperation, and peace-building in conflict-ridden regions. While NATO achieved significant successes, such as the training of Afghan security forces and improvements in infrastructure, the mission's ultimate failure to ensure lasting stability in Afghanistan underscores the difficulties of long-term intervention in fragile states. The lessons learned from NATO's experience in Afghanistan are invaluable for future military engagements. One of the key takeaways is the importance of adapting to the evolving nature of warfare, particularly the growing threat of hybrid warfare and the increasing role of non-state actors. NATO's ability to adjust to these changing dynamics will be critical in its future operations, as the alliance seeks to address new challenges, such as cyber attacks and disinformation campaigns, alongside traditional military threats. Another critical lesson from Afghanistan is the need for greater emphasis on cooperation between military, diplomatic, and civilian efforts. The integration of humanitarian assistance, governance support, and security efforts proved to be essential in Afghanistan's post-conflict environment. Future interventions must recognize that military force alone is insufficient to achieve sustainable peace, and that long-term stability depends on the development of strong institutions, the rule of law, and the protection of human rights. The experience also underscores the challenges of coalition warfare, where differences in national priorities and military capabilities can create operational difficulties. Effective leadership, communication, and coordination are essential for success in multinational coalitions. NATO's future operations will need to continue refining these aspects to maintain cohesion and achieve shared goals. Ultimately, the mission in Afghanistan has shaped NATO's role in global security, providing valuable insights into the complexities of modern military operations and international cooperation. While the alliance faced significant setbacks, the lessons learned from its experience will guide NATO in navigating future conflicts, ensuring that it remains a relevant and effective force for peace and stability in the international arena. The legacy of Afghanistan is a reminder of both the potential and limitations of collective military action, offering vital lessons for the future of international cooperation in conflict zones.
Chapter 1: The Rise of Al-Qaeda. The emergence of Al-Qaeda as a global terrorist organization is deeply rooted in the geopolitical upheavals of the late 20th century. Osama bin Laden, a wealthy Saudi national, played a pivotal role in its creation following the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. Initially, bin Laden supported the Mujahideen resistance with resources and logistics, forging relationships with key fighters and ideologues who would later become central to Al-Qaeda's foundation. As the war against the Soviets intensified, bin Laden began to adopt a more radical vision. Influenced by extremist scholars and battlefield experiences, he envisioned a transnational jihad that extended beyond Afghanistan. The end of the Soviet-Afghan War in 1989 marked a turning point. Instead of disbanding, many of the foreign fighters sought new causes, and bin Laden capitalized on this by formally establishing Al-Qaeda in 1988. Its purpose was clear: to defend Islam from perceived enemies, particularly Western powers and secular regimes in the Middle East. Throughout the 1990s, Al-Qaeda grew in both scope and ambition. Bin Laden's relocation to Sudan in the early part of the decade offered a temporary safe haven to consolidate his network. During this time, he formed alliances with other militant groups and refined his ideological platform. By the time he returned to Afghanistan in 1996, now under Taliban control, Al-Qaeda had developed the infrastructure, funding, and global connections necessary for large-scale operations. Bin Laden's 1996 and 1998 fatwas called for violent jihad against the United States, which he accused of occupying Muslim lands and supporting corrupt regimes. These declarations laid the ideological groundwork for future attacks. The bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998 marked Al-Qaeda's shift to international terror. 2 years later, the attack on the USS Cole in Yemen demonstrated the group's growing reach and operational capability. By the eve of the 21st century, Al-Qaeda had evolved from a loose collection of fighters into a formidable organization capable of executing complex plots. Its global strategy, charismatic leadership, and decentralized structure made it difficult to contain. As it plotted its most infamous operation, the September 11th attacks, the world remained largely unaware of the full extent of the threat it posed. The rise of Al-Qaeda set the stage for a new era of global conflict, one that would forever change the course of international security and American foreign policy. Origins of Osama bin Laden's network. The origins of Osama bin Laden's network can be traced to the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, a moment that reshaped the political and ideological landscape of the Muslim world. Bin Laden, the son of a wealthy Saudi construction magnate, initially joined the Afghan resistance out of a sense of religious duty. He was not just another volunteer fighter. He brought with him considerable financial resources, logistical skills, and connections within the Arab world. These assets positioned him as a key figure in the international jihadist movement that was beginning to take shape. Bin Laden's early involvement centered on supporting the Mujahideen by building roads, financing camps, and facilitating the travel and training of foreign fighters. He established what was known as the Services Bureau, Maktab al-Khidamat, alongside Palestinian cleric Abdullah Azzam. This organization functioned as a hub for recruiting, funding, and organizing Arab volunteers to fight the Soviets. Although initially focused on the Afghan conflict, it inadvertently created a transnational network of ideologically aligned fighters who would later form the backbone of Al-Qaeda. Over time, bin Laden began to drift away from Azzam's vision of a localized jihad. While Azam believed in focusing efforts on liberating Muslim lands through regional battles, bin Laden embraced a broader, more confrontational ideology that targeted the West, particularly the United States. This ideological shift deepened in the late 1980s as the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan, and bin Laden grew increasingly disillusioned with what he saw as Western interference in Muslim affairs. In 1988, bin Laden established al-Qaeda, the base, to formalize the network of fighters and strategists he had gathered. This group was designed not only to continue jihad, but also to wage a global campaign against secular regimes and Western powers, which bin Laden accused of oppressing Muslims and propping up corrupt governments in the Middle East. Al-Qaeda's formation marked a turning point from regional resistance to a worldwide terrorist enterprise. The core members of al-Qaeda were battle-hardened veterans of the Afghan War, and they brought with them not only combat experience, but also a deep sense of ideological purpose. Bin Laden's charisma, wealth, and commitment to the cause allowed him to attract followers and expand his reach beyond Afghanistan. What began as a support effort for Afghan resistance quickly evolved into a sophisticated and lethal network. This transformation laid the foundation for a new phase in international terrorism, one that would eventually culminate in the attacks of September 11, 2001. The road to radicalization. Osama bin Laden's journey toward radicalization was neither abrupt nor isolated. It was shaped by a combination of personal beliefs, political events, and ideological influences that unfolded over decades. Born into a life of privilege in Saudi Arabia, bin Laden was exposed early on to conservative interpretations of Islam. Educated in both religious and secular subjects, he was particularly drawn to the teachings of Salafism, a movement that emphasizes a return to the practices of the earliest generations of Muslims. During his university years, bin Laden's worldview began to evolve in response to regional and global tensions. The 1979 Iranian Revolution and the subsequent Soviet invasion of Afghanistan had a profound effect on young Muslims across the Middle East. For bin Laden, the Soviet invasion was a clear sign of foreign encroachment on Muslim lands, and he interpreted this as a call to arms. His response was not just spiritual, it was deeply political. He left behind a comfortable life and traveled to Pakistan to support the Afghan jihad, viewing it as both a religious obligation and a chance to defend Islam on a global scale. His experiences in Afghanistan deepened his conviction that military struggle was the only effective response to Western influence and intervention. As he built relationships with fellow fighters and Islamic scholars, he absorbed and eventually adopted more extreme ideological positions. The concept of martyrdom, the glorification of jihad, and a rigid interpretation of Islamic law all became central to his belief system. He began to frame the world in binary terms: Muslims versus non-Muslims, believers versus oppressors. What truly radicalized bin Laden, however, was not just the battlefield. It was the aftermath of the Gulf War in 1990-1991 that further solidified his antagonism toward the United States. He was enraged by the presence of American troops on Saudi soil, which he considered a desecration of the land of Islam's two holiest sites. When the Saudi government dismissed his offer to defend the kingdom using his own fighters and instead welcomed U.S. forces, bin Laden viewed it as a betrayal. From this point on, the United States became his primary enemy. Bin Laden's path to radicalization was a gradual layering of experiences, each reinforcing his belief that the Muslim world was under siege and that violence was a justified response. His ideology became the driving force behind al-Qaeda's global campaign, rooted in the belief that only through jihad could the Islamic world be restored to its former glory. From Afghanistan to global terror. The transition of Osama bin Laden's operations from a localized Afghan resistance effort to a global terror network marked a pivotal evolution in modern militancy. In the aftermath of the Soviet withdrawal from Afghanistan in 1989, the vast network of foreign fighters, many of whom had trained and fought under bin Laden's influence, did not simply disband. Instead, they dispersed across the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia, carrying with them the ideology and tactical training gained during the war. Bin Laden recognized the potential in this dispersion. Rather than fading into obscurity, he saw an opportunity to repurpose this network for a broader, more ambitious mission. The key shift occurred in the early 1990s when bin Laden moved to Sudan. There, he operated under the protection of the Islamist government and used his time to solidify al-Qaeda's structure. He invested in businesses, acquired weapons, trained operatives, and expanded his ideological outreach. It was during this period that bin Laden began targeting not just regional governments, but global powers, especially the United States, which he increasingly viewed as the central obstacle to establishing a pan-Islamic order. Al-Qaeda's first major international operations soon followed. The bombings of the U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998 killed over 200 people and signaled that bin Laden's ambitions had expanded well beyond the Middle East. These attacks demonstrated an unprecedented level of coordination and lethality. The group's reach was no longer confined to areas of active conflict. It had become truly global in its capabilities and targets. The defining moment in this transformation came on September 11, 2001. The coordinated hijackings and destruction of the World Trade Center towers and the attack on the Pentagon stunned the world and proved that al-Qaeda could strike at the heart of Western power with devastating impact. The operation required years of planning, extensive logistical support, and unwavering ideological commitment from its perpetrators. It was the culmination of bin Laden's vision of global jihad. In the span of just over a decade, bin Laden had turned a post-war guerrilla network into the most dangerous terrorist organization of the modern era. By shifting focus from local conflicts to a broader anti-Western agenda, he fundamentally altered the global security landscape. The war in Afghanistan had been the spark, but the fire he lit spread far beyond those mountains, igniting a global conflict that would define the early 21st century. Chapter 2: Prelude to Tora Bora. In the weeks following the September 11th attacks, the United States launched Operation Enduring Freedom with a clear objective: dismantle al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban from power in Afghanistan. This military campaign, which began in October 2001, was a swift and highly coordinated effort involving airstrikes, special operations, and alliances with Afghan opposition forces. At the heart of this operation was the hunt for Osama bin Laden, believed to be hiding somewhere in the rugged terrain of eastern Afghanistan. Tora Bora, a mountainous region near the Pakistani border, quickly emerged as the likely hiding place. The region's geography played a critical role in shaping military decisions. Tora Bora's cave systems and steep terrain had long made it a strategic refuge for Mujahideen fighters during the Soviet-Afghan War. Bin Laden was intimately familiar with its defensive advantages and had reportedly fortified the area with supplies, weapons, and loyal fighters. Intelligence reports, intercepted communications, and accounts from local informants all pointed to his presence in this remote sanctuary. Leading up to the battle, U.S. forces relied heavily on partnerships with the Northern Alliance and local Afghan warlords. American boots on the ground were limited, with a small number of CIA operatives and U.S. Special Forces working alongside Afghan militias to track bin Laden's movements. The Pentagon opted for a strategy that combined precision air power with local ground forces, aiming to avoid a large-scale deployment of American troops. While effective in many respects, this approach would later be criticized for its limitations in capturing high-value targets like bin Laden. By early December 2001, bin Laden's trail had led U.S. forces to the Tora Bora Mountains. The intelligence seemed solid, and pressure was mounting to capture or kill him before he could escape. Yet the clock was ticking, and the terrain, combined with complex tribal dynamics and inconsistent local cooperation, created serious obstacles. Despite the urgency, requests for additional American troops to block potential escape routes were either delayed or denied. The events that unfolded in Tora Bora would later spark intense debate and reflection. The decisions made during this prelude phase, reliance on local forces, limited troop presence, and underestimation of bin Laden's preparedness, laid the groundwork for what many would regard as a missed opportunity. As the operation moved toward its climactic battle, the stage was set for one of the most consequential moments in the early years of the War on Terror. The 9/11 attacks and aftermath. On the morning of September 11, 2001, the United States was struck by the deadliest terrorist attack in its history. 19 al-Qaeda operatives hijacked 4 commercial airliners, using them as weapons to target symbols of American power. 2 planes crashed into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City, causing both buildings to collapse within hours. A 3rd plane hit the Pentagon, the heart of U.S. military operations. The 4th, United Airlines Flight 93, was brought down in a Pennsylvania field after passengers attempted to overpower the hijackers. In total, nearly 3,000 people were killed. The attack sent shockwaves around the world. In its immediate aftermath, the U.S. government launched an intensive investigation, quickly identifying Osama bin Laden and his al-Qaeda network as the perpetrators. The clarity and scale of the attack left no doubt that this was an act of war, rather than a criminal incident. Within days, President George W. Bush addressed the nation and vowed to bring those responsible to justice, marking the beginning of the War on Terror. Domestically, the attacks reshaped American life. Security protocols changed almost overnight. The Department of Homeland Security was established, airport security was overhauled, and the USA Patriot Act was passed to enhance surveillance and intelligence gathering capabilities. The sense of vulnerability and urgency that followed 9/11 united much of the nation, but it also raised significant concerns about civil liberties and the balance between freedom and security. Internationally, the U.S. sought to build a coalition to combat terrorism. NATO invoked Article 5, declaring that an attack on one member was an attack on all, and allies pledged support. The global spotlight turned to Afghanistan, where the Taliban government had been harboring bin Laden and providing safe haven to al-Qaeda. When the Taliban refused to surrender bin Laden, the United States prepared for military action. The attacks were more than a national tragedy, they were a geopolitical turning point. They exposed vulnerabilities in U.S. intelligence and defense systems, highlighted the reach and coordination of terrorist networks, and triggered a worldwide response that would define global security policy for decades. For Osama bin Laden, 9/11 was the climax of years of planning and ideological commitment. For the United States, it was the beginning of a new era, one that would lead directly to the mountains of Tora Bora in search of the man responsible. Planning Operation Enduring Freedom. In the wake of the September 11th attacks, the United States moved quickly to respond with decisive military action. Planning for Operation Enduring Freedom, the codename for the U.S.-led invasion of Afghanistan, began almost immediately. The mission was clear: dismantle al-Qaeda, remove the Taliban from power, and prevent Afghanistan from continuing to serve as a safe haven for terrorists. But the path to execution was complex, requiring careful coordination between military, intelligence, and diplomatic channels. The early planning was spearheaded by the Department of Defense and the CIA, who had been tracking bin Laden and al-Qaeda activities for years. Intelligence gathered prior to 9/11, along with new information obtained in the immediate aftermath, formed the basis of targeted strikes and strategic decisions. The CIA deployed paramilitary teams into Afghanistan just weeks after the attacks, tasked with establishing contacts with anti-Taliban forces and preparing the battlefield for U.S. military operations. One of the central components of the plan was working with the Northern Alliance, a coalition of Afghan fighters who had long opposed Taliban rule. This partnership allowed the U.S. to gain a foothold in the country without deploying large numbers of ground troops at the outset. Special Forces teams were inserted alongside CIA operatives to coordinate airstrikes, supply weapons, and offer tactical support. The reliance on local forces became a defining feature of the operation's early phase. Air superiority was a key advantage for the United States. The strategy involved using precision-guided munitions to strike Taliban command centers, al-Qaeda training camps, and key infrastructure. The Pentagon emphasized speed and flexibility, opting for a high-tech, low-footprint approach that relied on intelligence-driven targeting rather than a full-scale invasion. Within days of the campaign's launch on October 7, 2001, Taliban positions were under heavy bombardment, and their grip on power began to weaken. Diplomatically, the U.S. worked to secure support from allies and neighboring countries, especially Pakistan, whose cooperation was essential due to its proximity and influence in Afghanistan. Gaining access to Pakistani airspace and logistical routes allowed the U.S. to maintain momentum and sustain operations deep within Afghan territory. Operation Enduring Freedom was more than a military campaign. It was a strategic response designed to reshape the landscape of international counterterrorism. While the initial objectives were achieved with remarkable speed, the long-term implications of the operation would unfold over years. In these early stages, however, the focus was on tracking down bin Laden, disrupting al-Qaeda's command structure, and toppling the Taliban regime that had sheltered them. The initial invasion of Afghanistan. The initial invasion of Afghanistan, launched on October 7, 2001, marked the opening salvo of Operation Enduring Freedom. It was a swift and calculated response to the September 11 attacks, aimed at dismantling al-Qaeda and removing the Taliban from power. The invasion began with a combination of airstrikes, cruise missile attacks, and covert ground operations, signaling a new kind of warfare, one that combined modern technology with agile small-unit tactics. The first phase of the campaign relied heavily on American air power to cripple Taliban defenses. Precision-guided bombs targeted Taliban command centers, training facilities, airfields, and communication hubs. These airstrikes were coordinated with intelligence gathered from both satellite surveillance and CIA operatives already on the ground. The psychological effect was immediate. Taliban forces began to scatter, and their control over major cities weakened. Simultaneously, CIA paramilitary teams and U.S. Special Forces units were embedded with Afghan opposition groups, particularly the Northern Alliance. These American teams provided weapons, communication support, and coordination for U.S. airstrikes. Their presence dramatically improved the effectiveness of Afghan ground offensives, allowing Northern Alliance fighters to rapidly advance against Taliban positions. Within weeks, the Taliban began losing ground. On November 13, 2001, the Northern Alliance captured Kabul, a symbolic and strategic victory that marked the unraveling of Taliban rule. Other cities followed quickly, including Herat and Mazar-i-Sharif, as the regime's power structure collapsed under the combined weight of internal rebellion and U.S.-led military pressure. Despite the rapid success, American forces remained cautious. The mountainous terrain and tribal loyalties of eastern Afghanistan posed significant challenges. Taliban leaders and al-Qaeda operatives, including Osama bin Laden, had begun retreating into remote regions like Tora Bora, where they could regroup and potentially launch a counteroffensive. U.S. commanders knew that while major cities were falling, the true test would come in the pursuit of bin Laden and the dismantling of al-Qaeda's deeply entrenched network. The initial invasion of Afghanistan achieved its immediate objectives with impressive speed, showcasing a new model of warfare that emphasized intelligence, precision, and collaboration with local forces. It also sent a strong message to the world about the reach and resolve of the United States. Yet even as the Taliban regime crumbled, the seeds of a prolonged conflict were being sown in the rugged hills and hidden valleys of Afghanistan, where the next phase of the mission, finding bin Laden, would soon take center stage. Chapter 3: Entering the White Mountains. As Taliban strongholds fell and the Afghan capital of Kabul was secured, U.S. and Allied intelligence began to focus intensely on eastern Afghanistan. All signs pointed to the White Mountains, a forbidding and remote range straddling the Afghan-Pakistani border, as the new refuge of Osama bin Laden and senior al-Qaeda leaders. At the heart of this terrain was Tora Bora, a maze of fortified caves and natural defenses that bin Laden had helped construct during the Soviet-Afghan War. It was here, among icy ridgelines and jagged cliffs, that the next and most critical phase of the manhunt would unfold. Entering the White Mountains was no small feat. The terrain was among the harshest in Afghanistan, covered in snow and laced with winding trails carved by centuries of tribal movement and warfare. The region's elevation, often exceeding 10,000 feet, challenged both equipment and personnel. Moreover, the area was inhabited by fiercely independent tribal groups, many of whom had long-standing allegiances to bin Laden due to his financial support and shared struggle against the Soviets. U.S. forces initially relied on local militias led by anti-Taliban commanders to gain ground in the region. These fighters knew the mountains and could move quickly, but their loyalty was not always guaranteed. Negotiations, bribes, and shifting alliances complicated efforts on the ground. American troops, including special forces and CIA operatives, worked to guide these militias, provide air support, and use intelligence to pinpoint al-Qaeda's movements. The mission's urgency was clear. Bin Laden was believed to be in the area, perhaps even within the Tora Bora complex itself. Intelligence from intercepted communications, satellite surveillance, and prisoner interrogations all seemed to confirm his presence. The pressure on commanders grew by the day. However, logistical limitations, rugged geography, and the risk of losing local support constrained the deployment of larger U.S. ground forces. As American aircraft bombarded suspected al-Qaeda positions, U.S. commanders faced a crucial decision: whether to rely on Afghan militias to trap bin Laden or to commit more U.S. troops to seal off escape routes into Pakistan. The choice to lean heavily on local forces, a decision influenced by concerns about escalating the war too quickly, would prove pivotal. The entry into the White Mountains marked a turning point. It was not only a physical incursion into enemy territory, but also a moment of strategic reckoning. The choices made in these cold, treacherous heights would shape the outcome of the manhunt and the broader direction of the war on terror. Geopolitical importance of Tora Bora. Tora Bora, a remote region in eastern Afghanistan near the border with Pakistan, held not only tactical significance but also profound geopolitical importance during the early stages of the war on terror. Its location, nestled in the White Mountains, made it a strategic stronghold for al-Qaeda and the Taliban. The complex network of caves and tunnels in Tora Bora provided a natural fortress that could shield fighters from both aerial bombardment and ground assaults, making it an ideal location for high-value targets like Osama bin Laden. From a geopolitical standpoint, Tora Bora's significance lay in its proximity to Pakistan, a nation with both strategic importance and complex political dynamics. Pakistan's border with Afghanistan, porous and mountainous, had long been a route for both militants and refugees. The mountainous terrain allowed al-Qaeda and Taliban forces to traverse between the two countries, creating a fluid battlefield that made military operations exceedingly difficult. The ability of militants to cross back and forth between Afghanistan and Pakistan meant that Tora Bora was not just a place to fight, but a nexus in the broader regional conflict involving multiple nations. Furthermore, Tora Bora was tied to broader Middle Eastern and Central Asian geopolitics. Bin Laden's presence in the region symbolized a growing Islamic extremist movement that sought to challenge Western influence and reshape the political order in Muslim-majority countries. Al-Qaeda's leadership in Tora Bora represented not just a threat to Afghanistan, but a central pillar of a broader ideological battle against the United States and its allies. The mountain stronghold became a symbol of resistance and defiance, attracting not only local fighters, but also foreign jihadists willing to take part in a global struggle against perceived Western oppression. The geopolitical stakes were further complicated by the involvement of neighboring Pakistan, which faced its own internal challenges. The U.S. relied heavily on Pakistan for logistical support, but the country's own security concerns and its complex relationship with the Taliban made cooperation uncertain. The pursuit of bin Laden in Tora Bora was not just a military mission. It was an international diplomatic and intelligence operation that required balancing relations with Pakistan, securing the region, and preventing the resurgence of al-Qaeda. In essence, the geopolitical importance of Tora Bora was far-reaching. It was not merely a military objective, but a key battleground in the broader struggle for influence in the post-9/11 world, with implications for regional stability, international alliances, and the global fight against terrorism. Terrain and tribal dynamics. The rugged terrain of eastern Afghanistan, particularly the White Mountains and the Tora Bora region, played a critical role in shaping the dynamics of the U.S. military's operations against al-Qaeda. The landscape was a formidable natural defense, composed of steep cliffs, dense caves, and narrow winding paths that were difficult for both soldiers and vehicles to navigate. The high altitudes, often exceeding 10,000 feet, created challenges for U.S. forces, who were not only contending with the enemy, but also battling harsh weather conditions and physical exhaustion. The cave complexes in Tora Bora, once used by Mujahideen fighters against the Soviet forces, had been further fortified by bin Laden's al-Qaeda operatives. These caves were connected by an intricate network of tunnels, making it incredibly difficult for airstrikes to decisively neutralize the threat. The sheer remoteness of the area allowed al-Qaeda fighters to move in and out of these shelters with ease, taking advantage of the mountainous terrain to elude capture. However, the geography alone was not the only challenge. The tribal dynamics in the region added another layer of complexity to the operation. The tribal groups in eastern Afghanistan were fiercely independent, with long-standing traditions and local allegiances that often transcended national borders. Many of these tribes had historical ties to the Taliban or had benefited from al-Qaeda's support, particularly in the form of financial aid and military assistance during the Soviet-Afghan War. This created a deeply ingrained network of loyalty and secrecy that hindered the efforts of U.S. and allied forces. Local tribes often operated in a semi-autonomous manner, and their loyalties could shift depending on the political and material incentives offered by various factions. As a result, many tribal leaders in the Tora Bora area were reluctant to fully cooperate with U.S. forces, and some even provided support to the Taliban and al-Qaeda fighters who sought refuge in the mountains. This made intelligence gathering a constant struggle, as U.S. forces found it difficult to distinguish between genuine local support and opposition to their presence. The terrain and tribal dynamics in Tora Bora thus created an environment in which conventional military strategies struggled to succeed. While the U.S. relied heavily on airstrikes and small ground units, the combination of treacherous geography and shifting local allegiances meant that the hunt for bin Laden was far more complicated than initially anticipated. These challenges would have long-lasting effects on the mission's outcome and the broader conflict in Afghanistan. Intelligence gathering and reconnaissance. In the pursuit of Osama bin Laden in Tora Bora, intelligence gathering and reconnaissance were critical to shaping U.S. military strategies. However, the complexities of the region and the nature of al-Qaeda's operations posed significant challenges. Intelligence, which often relied on a combination of human sources, satellite surveillance, and intercepted communications, was vital to tracking bin Laden's movements, but the task was fraught with uncertainty. The U.S. military and intelligence agencies initially relied on a network of CIA operatives, special forces teams, and local Afghan fighters to collect intelligence. These sources, though valuable, were sometimes unreliable due to the inherent mistrust between U.S. forces and local tribes. The complex tribal dynamics of the region meant that many of the individuals providing information had their own agendas or were swayed by tribal loyalties, leading to fragmented and occasionally inaccurate reports. Satellite and aerial reconnaissance also played an essential role in the operation. High-tech surveillance, including drone footage and infrared imaging, helped U.S. forces monitor the movements of al-Qaeda fighters and determine their positions. Despite these advances in technology, the mountainous terrain of Tora Bora created significant difficulties for effective intelligence gathering. The caves and tunnels, often hidden by the steep landscape, offered natural concealment for fighters and made it difficult to track bin Laden and his followers with precision. As the battle unfolded, the need for ground-level intelligence became even more apparent. The reliance on local Afghan militias and tribal leaders meant that much of the intelligence came from individuals with intimate knowledge of the region, but also those with potentially shifting loyalties. Despite these challenges, the CIA and U.S. Special Forces continued to push for more accurate intelligence, sometimes relying on captured prisoners or defectors from the Taliban for information. However, the rapid pace of the operation and the ongoing instability in the region made it difficult to gather consistent, actionable intelligence. Ultimately, while intelligence efforts helped guide airstrikes and ground movements, the limited access to reliable sources in the region hampered the effectiveness of the mission. The hunt for bin Laden in Tora Bora showcased both the power and limitations of intelligence gathering in a hostile, unpredictable environment, a reality that would affect military operations in Afghanistan for years to come. Chapter 4: The Hunt Begins. Following the collapse of the Taliban regime and the capture of key cities in Afghanistan, the focus of U.S. forces shifted to locating Osama bin Laden and dismantling al-Qaeda's network. With the fall of Kabul and other major cities, intelligence suggested that bin Laden was holed up in the Tora Bora region, a rugged and fortified part of eastern Afghanistan. It was here, amidst the treacherous mountain terrain, that the hunt for the elusive al-Qaeda leader would truly begin. The U.S. military strategy in Tora Bora involved a combination of precision airstrikes, special forces operations, and the collaboration of local Afghan militias, many of whom had been hostile to the Taliban. Special forces teams, along with CIA operatives, were inserted into the region to coordinate with these militias, providing tactical support and intelligence. The idea was to leverage local knowledge and resources to track down bin Laden, while avoiding the need for a large-scale ground invasion. The initial stages of the hunt were marked by uncertainty. The mountainous landscape provided ample cover for bin Laden and his inner circle, with caves and narrow passes offering ideal hiding spots. U.S. airstrikes targeted known al-Qaeda positions, but despite the overwhelming firepower, it was unclear whether bin Laden was still in the area. The use of local militias proved both a blessing and a curse. While these forces had intimate knowledge of the terrain, their loyalties were often divided. Many had their own motivations, and some were more focused on settling local scores than assisting in the hunt for bin Laden. As intelligence reports came in, it became clear that bin Laden had been using the region's geography to his advantage. He had reportedly retreated deeper into the caves, evading direct hits from airstrikes and minimizing the chances of being tracked by U.S. forces. The reliance on local forces for ground reconnaissance became more critical, but also more problematic. The U.S. military found itself caught in a delicate balance between relying on these local militias and ensuring that the mission was executed with precision. The hunt for bin Laden in Tora Bora marked the beginning of a larger, more prolonged campaign in Afghanistan. Despite the heavy bombardment and the support of local forces, the operation was proving to be more difficult than anticipated. As the days passed, it became clear that capturing or killing bin Laden in this mountainous labyrinth would be a complex, elusive goal, one that would require more than just military might. Special forces and CIA involvement. The hunt for Osama bin Laden in the Tora Bora region relied heavily on the combined efforts of U.S. Special Forces and the CIA. These two groups played a pivotal role in the ground operations, working together with local Afghan militias to locate and capture or kill bin Laden and his al-Qaeda operatives. Special forces, known for their specialized training and experience in unconventional warfare, were crucial in coordinating direct military action, while the CIA provided vital intelligence and logistical support. U.S. Special Forces teams were deployed in the rugged terrain of Tora Bora, working alongside Afghan forces from the Northern Alliance. These troops were skilled in operating in harsh, isolated environments, and their presence allowed the U.S. to avoid large-scale ground invasions, which would have been logistically complex and politically risky. The Special Forces mission was to provide direct combat support, help guide airstrikes, and use their expertise in tracking enemy movements in the mountains. The CIA's involvement in Tora Bora was equally important, as the agency had been deeply embedded in the region for years. The CIA's paramilitary operatives, often working in conjunction with special forces, were instrumental in gathering intelligence on al-Qaeda's location, structure, and movements. They coordinated efforts with local tribal leaders and Afghan militias, many of whom had been fighting against the Taliban for years. This local knowledge was invaluable, as these fighters knew the terrain better than anyone and could provide critical insights into the enemy's tactics and hideouts. The CIA also utilized human intelligence, to track down leads, often relying on sources within the local population or captured Taliban prisoners to gather information. However, the use of local militias had its drawbacks. These groups were not always reliable, and their shifting loyalties complicated the operation. Some were more focused on their own tribal rivalries than on cooperating with U.S. forces, creating a layer of uncertainty in the intelligence that came from the region. Together, Special Forces and CIA operatives represented the heart of the U.S. mission in Tora Bora. Their combined efforts were designed to track bin Laden through the treacherous mountains, disrupt al-Qaeda's operations, and ultimately eliminate the leadership of the terrorist network. While their collaboration was vital to the operation's progress, the mission also underscored the limitations of relying on small, elite units in a vast and unforgiving landscape. Alliances with Afghan militias. In the hunt for Osama bin Laden and the broader goal of dismantling al-Qaeda, U.S. forces formed crucial alliances with Afghan militias, particularly those aligned with the Northern Alliance. These local groups, many of whom had been fighting the Taliban for years, provided invaluable support to U.S. operations in the Tora Bora region. The alliances were not only instrumental in navigating the complex tribal and mountainous terrain, but also in providing intelligence, manpower, and local knowledge that U.S. forces lacked. The Northern Alliance, a coalition of Afghan factions united by their opposition to the Taliban, was one of the primary groups with which the U.S. worked closely. This alliance had a deep understanding of Afghanistan's geography and culture, and many of its fighters were familiar with the rugged paths leading to Tora Bora. The local militias knew the terrain better than any outside force, giving them an edge in tracking down al-Qaeda operatives who were familiar with the landscape. However, these alliances came with complexities. Afghan militias were often motivated by their own regional interests, personal vendettas, and tribal loyalties, which did not always align with the U.S. mission. This created challenges in maintaining a cohesive strategy, as some militias were less committed to hunting bin Laden than to pursuing their own objectives, such as rivalries with other factions or gaining territory. The fluid nature of local alliances meant that cooperation could quickly turn into tension, especially when interests conflicted. Despite these challenges, the alliances with Afghan militias were essential for U.S. success in the early stages of the hunt for bin Laden. Militias played a key role in conducting ground operations and supporting U.S. airstrikes. The fighters provided direct support in the mountainous regions, where U.S. forces would have been at a significant disadvantage. Their knowledge of the land allowed for quicker identification of potential al-Qaeda hideouts and retreat routes, even though their loyalties could be unpredictable. Moreover, these alliances served as a bridge for the U.S. to engage with local power structures and gain a foothold in Afghanistan. In return for their support, the militias received weapons, supplies, and the promise of a post-Taliban political role. However, the difficulty in maintaining these alliances highlighted the challenges of working with non-state actors who operated based on shifting political and tribal dynamics. The cooperation between U.S. forces and Afghan militias was indispensable, but it underscored the delicate balance between military objectives and the realities of Afghanistan's deeply rooted tribal and political conflicts. Tracking bin Laden's movements. Tracking Osama bin Laden's movements during the hunt in the Tora Bora region was one of the most challenging aspects of the operation. His ability to move through the mountainous terrain, combined with al-Qaeda's use of caves and natural hideouts, made it exceedingly difficult for U.S. forces to pinpoint his exact location. Despite extensive intelligence efforts, bin Laden was adept at evading detection, often using the very geography of eastern Afghanistan to his advantage. One of the key strategies in tracking bin Laden was the use of human intelligence, gathered from local Afghan militias and Taliban prisoners. However, the reliability of these sources was often questionable. Many local fighters had their own motivations and shifting loyalties, which made it difficult for U.S. forces to distinguish between accurate intelligence and disinformation. This challenge was compounded by the fact that bin Laden's inner circle was well trained in counter-surveillance, taking steps to avoid detection through various means, including changing routes frequently and using decoys. In addition to human, U.S. forces relied heavily on satellite surveillance and aerial reconnaissance to monitor the region. This included using drones and infrared imaging to detect heat signatures, hoping to locate groups of people moving through the rugged terrain. However, the dense caves and the mountainous landscape often obstructed clear visuals, making it difficult to confirm whether bin Laden was truly present in a given location. Despite these technological efforts, the use of airstrikes and heavy bombardment, although successful in disrupting al-Qaeda operations, could not definitively confirm bin Laden's presence. In fact, several reports suggested that bin Laden may have already escaped by the time these efforts were launched. His ability to retreat quickly into Pakistan or deeper into the mountains further complicated tracking efforts. As the hunt continued, U.S. forces were forced to rely increasingly on the cooperation of local militias to act as ground forces. These militias, although knowledgeable of the terrain, were often unreliable and at times more focused on their own regional rivalries than on assisting U.S. operations. This made it difficult to form a coherent and unified approach to capturing or killing bin Laden. Tracking bin Laden's movements in Tora Bora was a race against time, with U.S. forces scrambling to close off escape routes while attempting to capture the elusive terrorist leader. Despite a concerted effort, the hunt ultimately demonstrated the challenges of operating in such a hostile, unpredictable environment. Chapter 5: The Battle Unfolds. As U.S. and Allied forces intensified their efforts to capture Osama bin Laden in Tora Bora, the operation evolved into a full-scale battle. The region's rugged terrain and the complex web of caves and tunnels made it a natural stronghold for bin Laden and his followers. Despite the overwhelming technological advantages of the U.S. military, the mountainous landscape and the tenacity of al-Qaeda fighters made the fight far more challenging than anticipated. The battle began with a heavy reliance on airstrikes, aimed at disrupting al-Qaeda's positions and destroying their infrastructure. U.S. bombers and drones targeted key sites in the mountains, hoping to flush out the al-Qaeda operatives hiding within the caves. However, the effectiveness of these strikes was limited by the geography of Tora Bora. The deep caves and narrow valleys provided excellent cover, making it difficult for airstrikes to penetrate and fully neutralize the threat. The al-Qaeda fighters, including bin Laden's closest associates, were able to evade many of these attacks by retreating into the tunnels or moving deeper into the mountains. On the ground, U.S. Special Forces and CIA operatives worked alongside Afghan militias, but coordination between the different forces proved difficult. The militias, though familiar with the terrain, had their own goals and motivations. Some were hesitant to fully cooperate with U.S. forces, while others had allegiances to local warlords or were distracted by regional power struggles. This fractured cooperation hampered the ability of the U.S. to conduct an effective, unified assault on bin Laden's position. As the battle unfolded, al-Qaeda fighters put up fierce resistance, using the terrain to their advantage. Sniper fire, ambushes, and hit-and-run tactics were employed to slow the advance of U.S. forces. The constant need to monitor and secure the rugged terrain made it difficult to maintain a continuous offensive. The Afghan militias also struggled with discipline, and their reluctance to engage in direct combat with bin Laden's forces led to gaps in the defensive perimeter. The battle in Tora Bora showcased the limits of relying on air power and local allies to achieve military objectives in a region as unpredictable and hostile as the White Mountains. Despite months of intense fighting and numerous airstrikes, the operation struggled to achieve its primary goal, capturing or killing bin Laden. The complexities of the battle, combined with the political and logistical challenges, led to a sense of frustration among U.S. forces, even as the operation continued to unfold in the mountains of eastern Afghanistan. The start of the assault. The start of the assault on Tora Bora marked a critical phase in the hunt for Osama bin Laden and the dismantling of al-Qaeda's operations in Afghanistan. Following weeks of intelligence gathering, airstrikes, and ground reconnaissance, U.S. forces, supported by Afghan militias, finally launched a coordinated offensive against the al-Qaeda stronghold in the White Mountains. The mission was clear: capture or kill bin Laden and eliminate the al-Qaeda network entrenched in the region. The initial assault began with a series of precision airstrikes aimed at disrupting the al-Qaeda fighters' positions and infrastructure. These early strikes targeted caves, tunnels, and suspected weapons caches, hoping to weaken the enemy's defenses. The terrain, however, posed significant challenges for the effectiveness of these bombings. The vast network of caves and narrow valleys provided perfect cover for bin Laden and his followers. As the airstrikes continued, it became apparent that bin Laden's forces were adept at using the geography to evade direct hits, retreating deeper into the mountains or dispersing into smaller, more mobile units. On the ground, U.S. Special Forces and CIA operatives were deployed to secure key positions and coordinate with local Afghan militias. These militias, while knowledgeable about the terrain, were not always reliable or cohesive. Many of them had their own regional interests and tribal loyalties, making cooperation with U.S. forces difficult at times. Despite these challenges, the militias played a critical role in providing local intelligence and manpower. They led the way through the difficult mountain passes, providing valuable support in tracking down al-Qaeda operatives and assisting in securing the surrounding area. As the assault progressed, the resistance from al-Qaeda fighters intensified. They used guerrilla tactics, ambushes, and sniper fire to slow the advance of U.S. and Afghan forces. The mountainous terrain provided them with natural defensive positions, making it difficult for the attackers to maintain a steady offensive. The U.S. forces, although equipped with advanced technology and firepower, faced significant obstacles in engaging a highly mobile enemy in such a challenging environment. The start of the assault marked the beginning of a protracted and difficult battle. Despite initial successes in disrupting al-Qaeda positions, the operation faced unforeseen complications, highlighting the complexity of fighting in such a rugged and hostile landscape. The challenges encountered during the initial phase would set the tone for the remainder of the operation, as U.S. forces and their Afghan allies navigated the intricacies of the terrain and the elusive tactics of their enemy. Airstrikes and ground maneuvers. The effectiveness of the assault on Tora Bora was heavily influenced by a combination of airstrikes and ground maneuvers. U.S. forces, along with Afghan militias, relied on a dual approach, combining the overwhelming firepower of airstrikes with the strategic flexibility of ground operations. This combination was designed to disrupt al-Qaeda's stronghold in the rugged terrain, while also ensuring that forces on the ground could maintain pressure on the enemy, even when airstrikes could not guarantee success. Airstrikes were the primary tool in the initial phase of the assault. Precision bombing runs targeted caves, tunnel entrances, and known al-Qaeda hideouts, with the goal of destroying infrastructure and creating chaos within the ranks of bin Laden's forces. These strikes were carefully planned, with U.S. bombers, drones, and fighter jets used to hit key locations while minimizing civilian casualties. However, the mountainous terrain proved too challenging for airstrikes to achieve the desired effect. The caves and tunnels, often located deep within the mountains, were shielded from direct hits, allowing al-Qaeda fighters to retreat to safer positions and continue their operations. While air power played a significant role, ground maneuvers were equally important in securing strategic points and maintaining constant pressure on al-Qaeda. U.S. Special Forces, in coordination with CIA operatives, led these operations on the ground. They worked closely with local Afghan militias, who had intimate knowledge of the mountainous terrain and its hidden passages. However, coordinating the movements of these local forces proved difficult, as many militias had their own goals and were not always reliable allies. Despite these challenges, the combined efforts of the U.S. and Afghan forces allowed for the gradual encirclement of al-Qaeda positions. On the ground, special forces used their expertise in unconventional warfare to outmaneuver al-Qaeda fighters, engaging them in hit-and-run tactics and employing small unit strategies. This allowed U.S. forces to maintain momentum, despite the difficulties posed by the environment. Ground teams also took advantage of the local knowledge provided by Afghan militias, identifying hidden routes and cave networks that would have been difficult to detect otherwise. The combination of airstrikes and ground maneuvers created a multifaceted approach to the battle for Tora Bora. While airstrikes helped to disrupt and disorient the enemy, the ground operations were essential in closing in on bin Laden's forces and preventing them from escaping. The synergy of these efforts, despite the challenges faced, underscored the complexity of military operations in such a hostile mountainous region. Resistance in the caves. The caves of Tora Bora played a central role in the resistance faced by U.S. forces during their attempt to capture or kill Osama bin Laden. These natural fortifications provided al-Qaeda operatives with the perfect cover, allowing them to evade detection and prolong their resistance against the assault. Despite heavy airstrikes and ground operations, the cave system proved to be a formidable obstacle, enabling bin Laden and his followers to mount a tenacious defense. The caves themselves, carved into the rugged terrain of the White Mountains, were extensive and complex, with multiple levels, hidden passages, and small chambers. These structures provided both tactical advantage and safety for al-Qaeda fighters. The ability to quickly move between various cave entrances and to hide deep within the mountains made it difficult for U.S. forces to target specific locations effectively. Airstrikes, while powerful, were often unable to fully penetrate the cave systems, allowing al-Qaeda to continue their resistance despite the heavy bombardment. Inside these caves, the defenders were well prepared for a prolonged standoff. Al-Qaeda fighters, including many seasoned veterans of previous conflicts, knew the terrain better than most U.S. forces. They were equipped with weapons, supplies, and fortified positions, which allowed them to withstand prolonged siege tactics. The terrain also gave them the ability to operate with great mobility, launching ambushes and sniper attacks to slow the advance of U.S. forces. For U.S. troops, the challenge was twofold. Not only did they have to contend with the difficult physical terrain, but they also had to face an enemy that was well versed in the tactics of asymmetric warfare. The caves offered a natural defensive advantage, and al-Qaeda's fighters were adept at using the environment to their benefit, engaging in hit-and-run tactics, laying traps, and retreating to the safety of the caves whenever they were under threat. Despite the technological superiority of the U.S. military, the ability to root out every al-Qaeda fighter hiding within these caves proved to be an immense challenge. The reliance on air power and local militias had its limitations, and while special forces were able to secure some cave entrances, they could not effectively neutralize the resistance hidden within. The resistance in the caves of Tora Bora illustrated the difficulties of fighting a highly adaptable, entrenched enemy in a difficult and unpredictable environment. It was a stark reminder of the limits of military technology and the challenges of pursuing an elusive target in such a hostile natural fortress. Chapter 6: Escape or Elimination. As the battle in Tora Bora raged on, the question of whether Osama bin Laden would be captured or eliminated became central to the mission. The intense airstrikes and ground operations were designed to isolate and dismantle al-Qaeda's stronghold in the White Mountains, but as the days wore on, a critical issue emerged. Was bin Laden still there, or had he successfully escaped the encirclement? U.S. forces, aided by Afghan militias, conducted a relentless search to track bin Laden's movements. The combination of airstrikes and ground operations, while effective in disrupting al-Qaeda positions, did not guarantee a clear victory. The mountainous terrain, coupled with a complex network of caves and tunnels, provided bin Laden and his followers with numerous escape routes. Despite the mounting pressure, bin Laden's ability to evade capture in such a harsh and unpredictable environment raised doubts about the effectiveness of the operation. At the same time, reports emerged suggesting that bin Laden might have already slipped past U.S. forces, possibly escaping to neighboring Pakistan. This scenario created a tense atmosphere, as military leaders faced the dilemma of whether the U.S. had missed its window for capturing or eliminating the al-Qaeda leader. The presence of tribal militias and their mixed loyalties further complicated the operation, as some groups may have been sympathetic to bin Laden or reluctant to fully support U.S. actions. The failure to decisively capture bin Laden in Tora Bora led to widespread criticism of the operation's execution. While the U.S. had made significant gains in disrupting al-Qaeda's infrastructure, the lack of a clear outcome in the battle highlighted the challenges of relying on local alliances and intelligence in a region fraught with political and logistical complications. Furthermore, the possibility that bin Laden had escaped, potentially into the porous border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan, raised further questions about the U.S. strategy and the long-term effectiveness of the mission. In the end, the battle for Tora Bora was not a clear-cut victory. Bin Laden's fate remained uncertain, and the operation was marked by its inability to definitively capture or kill him in the region. His escape, or possible survival, underscored the elusive nature of the al-Qaeda leader and set the stage for a prolonged hunt that would continue for nearly another decade. The events at Tora Bora marked a turning point, where the line between escape and elimination became blurred, and the legacy of the battle would echo throughout the subsequent years of counterterrorism efforts. Signals and satellite intercepts. In the hunt for Osama bin Laden during the battle at Tora Bora, signals and satellite intercepts played a crucial role in tracking the movements of al-Qaeda operatives. Intelligence gathered through these means was essential in identifying key locations, intercepting communications, and providing valuable insights into the enemy's strategies. However, despite the technological advancements, these efforts faced numerous challenges in the rugged and remote terrain of the White Mountains. Signals intelligence, SIGINT, was one of the primary tools used by U.S. forces to locate bin Laden and his associates. By intercepting radio communications, satellite phone calls, and other electronic signals, U.S. military and intelligence agencies were able to monitor al-Qaeda's movements and identify key leaders within the network. These intercepts provided critical leads on the positions of al-Qaeda fighters and the coordination of their operations. However, the process was not without limitations. Al-Qaeda operatives were highly skilled at using encrypted communications and adopting countermeasures to protect their movements. As a result, it became increasingly difficult for U.S. forces to pinpoint the exact location of bin Laden. Satellite intelligence, including imagery and communications intercepts, also played a pivotal role in the operation. U.S. satellites, equipped with high-resolution cameras and infrared sensors, were used to monitor the Tora Bora region. These satellites allowed for the detection of heat signatures from human activity, which could indicate the presence of enemy fighters or large gatherings. Despite the high-tech capabilities of these satellites, the dense cave systems and mountainous terrain limited their effectiveness. The sheer number of possible locations for hiding within the cave networks meant that even advanced satellite imagery could not provide a definitive identification of bin Laden's whereabouts. Moreover, the reliance on satellite communications for intelligence gathering also posed challenges. The remote nature of Tora Bora, coupled with the use of rudimentary communication systems by al-Qaeda, made it difficult for U.S. forces to intercept clear and actionable signals. As a result, much of the intelligence gathered through these methods was circumstantial and often inconclusive, leaving U.S. forces to rely on human intelligence and physical reconnaissance to fill in the gaps. Despite these challenges, signals and satellite intercepts remained a crucial component of the effort to locate and neutralize bin Laden. The intelligence they provided helped U.S. forces to narrow down possible locations and track the movements of al-Qaeda operatives. However, the complexity of the environment and the sophistication of bin Laden's network highlighted the limitations of even the most advanced surveillance technologies in ensuring a decisive victory in the battle for Tora Bora. The missing window of opportunity. The battle at Tora Bora represented a critical moment in the hunt for Osama bin Laden, yet it is often viewed as a missed opportunity in capturing or eliminating the al-Qaeda leader. The operation, which was intended to be a decisive strike, was marred by a number of strategic and logistical missteps that led to the window of opportunity for bin Laden's capture slipping away. One of the primary reasons for this missed opportunity was the lack of a decisive military commitment to the operation. Although the U.S. had overwhelming technological advantages, including airstrikes and special forces units, the initial assault failed to provide the necessary ground presence to prevent bin Laden and his followers from escaping. The reliance on local Afghan militias, while helpful in some respects, created complications. The militias, often divided along tribal lines, lacked the coordination and discipline necessary for a large-scale, high-stakes operation. Their own allegiances and interests frequently conflicted with the goals of the U.S. forces, which slowed the pace of the assault and created gaps in the encirclement of al-Qaeda positions. Additionally, intelligence gathering, although crucial, was not as effective as hoped. While signals intelligence and satellite intercepts provided valuable leads, the complex geography of Tora Bora made it difficult to act on that information in real time. Al-Qaeda's use of cave networks and the mountainous terrain allowed them to evade detection, and the overwhelming reliance on air power, while powerful, could not neutralize the threat fast enough. Despite having bin Laden cornered in a region surrounded by U.S. forces, the operation faltered when key intelligence failed to pinpoint his exact location or provide sufficient real-time updates. The decision to allow Pakistani border areas to remain accessible to al-Qaeda also played a role in bin Laden's potential escape. With limited control over the mountainous border regions, it became easier for al-Qaeda fighters, including bin Laden himself, to slip across the border into Pakistan, a move that would extend the manhunt for nearly a decade. The combination of delayed action, miscommunications, and a failure to fully capitalize on the intelligence gathered created a narrow window for success that quickly closed. In hindsight, the battle at Tora Bora is seen as a critical moment in the pursuit of bin Laden, one in which the U.S. failed to act decisively enough to seal the deal. The missed opportunity at Tora Bora set the stage for a long, frustrating search that would continue for years to come. Bin Laden's reported escape to Pakistan. Following the intense battle at Tora Bora, reports began to surface that Osama bin Laden had successfully escaped U.S. forces by slipping across the mountainous border into Pakistan. Despite being surrounded by U.S. Special Forces and Afghan militias, bin Laden's ability to elude capture during the operation raised significant concerns about the effectiveness of the assault and highlighted the complex geopolitical and logistical challenges that surrounded the operation. The mountainous terrain of Tora Bora, with its network of caves and narrow valleys, was a perfect refuge for bin Laden and his followers. This natural fortification allowed them to hide and regroup, while U.S. forces, despite their technological superiority, struggled to pinpoint exact locations. As the battle unfolded, intelligence suggested that bin Laden had managed to escape through a series of hidden routes into Pakistan, possibly aided by local sympathizers or by navigating the rugged borderland that was notoriously difficult to patrol. One of the primary reasons bin Laden's escape was possible was the lack of secure control over the Afghan-Pakistani border. Despite the heavy presence of U.S. and Afghan forces in Tora Bora, the border region remained porous, allowing bin Laden and other al-Qaeda operatives to flee across the mountainous pass into the tribal areas of Pakistan. The lack of coordination between U.S. and Pakistani forces at the time further complicated efforts to block bin Laden's escape. Pakistan, at the time, was reluctant to fully support the U.S. efforts in pursuing al-Qaeda leaders, partly due to political and strategic considerations, as well as concerns over the reaction of local tribal groups sympathetic to bin Laden. Bin Laden's reported escape into Pakistan marked a significant turning point in the pursuit of al-Qaeda's leader. His flight from Tora Bora prolonged the manhunt and set the stage for a decade-long search that would ultimately end with his death in 2011. The escape also raised questions about the overall strategy used in the hunt for bin Laden, particularly regarding the reliance on local militias, insufficient border control, and the difficulties of operating in such a volatile and inaccessible region. In hindsight, the failure to capture bin Laden at Tora Bora is viewed as a critical moment in the fight against terrorism. His reported escape into Pakistan not only allowed him to remain a threat for years, but also exposed the limitations of the international coalition's efforts and the challenges of pursuing a high-value target in such a complex and hostile environment. Chapter 7: Aftermath and Accountability. The aftermath of the Tora Bora battle had far-reaching implications, both in terms of military strategy and global counter-terrorism efforts. The failure to capture or kill Osama bin Laden during the operation created a sense of unfinished business, raising questions about the effectiveness of the U.S. response and the broader strategy in the war on terror. The consequences of this operation would continue to shape U.S. military policy and international relations for years to come. In the immediate aftermath, the inability to capture bin Laden was seen as a significant setback. U.S. forces had surrounded his stronghold and launched a concerted assault, yet bin Laden managed to evade capture by slipping across the porous Afghan-Pakistani border. This escape raised concerns about the effectiveness of the coalition's intelligence and coordination, as well as the challenges posed by the rugged terrain and local dynamics. Questions were raised about whether more resources should have been allocated to the operation, or if different strategies could have been employed to secure a better outcome. Accountability for the failure to apprehend bin Laden became a point of contention within the U.S. government. Military leaders, intelligence agencies, and political officials all faced scrutiny for the decisions made during the battle. Some critics pointed to a lack of coordination between U.S. forces and Afghan militias, while others argued that there was insufficient follow-up intelligence and border control to prevent bin Laden's escape. The debate over accountability also extended to the broader U.S. strategy in Afghanistan and the intelligence community's role in tracking down high-value targets like bin Laden. On a larger scale, the events at Tora Bora had significant ramifications for U.S. foreign policy and military doctrine. The operation underscored the importance of intelligence sharing and the challenges of fighting asymmetrical warfare in complex mountainous regions. The inability to capture bin Laden at Tora Bora highlighted the difficulties of relying on local forces and intelligence while also attempting to control a volatile region. It led to calls for reform in intelligence operations and military coordination, with an emphasis on improved surveillance, better local partnerships, and more decisive action in future operations. In the years that followed, the failure at Tora Bora became a symbol of the larger challenges facing the U.S. in its fight against terrorism. While bin Laden's eventual capture in 2011 brought some closure to the issue, the battle at Tora Bora was a reminder of the complexities and limitations of military interventions in the pursuit of global security. The legacy of Tora Bora shaped the subsequent policies and approaches taken by the U.S. in counterterrorism efforts, reinforcing the lessons learned from that critical moment in history. Debates within the Pentagon. In the wake of the Tora Bora operation, debates within the Pentagon became a focal point for evaluating the effectiveness of the U.S. strategy in Afghanistan. The failure to capture or kill Osama bin Laden during the battle raised tough questions about the planning, execution, and overall approach to the war on terror. As the dust settled, discussions within the Pentagon revealed a complex web of differing opinions about intelligence, military strategy, and interagency coordination, which would shape future decisions in the conflict. One of the key points of debate centered around the role of local Afghan militias in the operation. Many Pentagon officials questioned the decision to rely heavily on these forces, given their lack of training and often divided allegiances. While the militias were seen as an essential part of the coalition in the fight against the Taliban, their effectiveness in the Tora Bora campaign was limited. The failure to secure critical points of entry and control over the mountainous region exposed the risks of relying on these groups without a more robust and unified military presence. Another area of contention was the intelligence gathering and the decision to delay direct military action. Some within the Pentagon argued that more aggressive and immediate action could have prevented bin Laden's escape. They contended that the intelligence gathered, though useful, was not acted upon swiftly enough to create a decisive encirclement. Others, however, pointed to the difficulties inherent in operating in such a complex and hostile environment, emphasizing the challenges of confirming bin Laden's exact location and dealing with the uncertainty of the terrain. Moreover, the question of coordination between U.S. forces and their Pakistani counterparts was another point of contention. The U.S. had limited influence over the border region between Afghanistan and Pakistan, which was known to be a haven for al-Qaeda militants. Pentagon discussions often reflected frustrations with Pakistan's reluctance to fully engage in counterterrorism efforts, a dynamic that complicated U.S. operations and potentially allowed bin Laden to slip away. The debates within the Pentagon were not solely about operational missteps, but also about long-term strategy. The inability to neutralize bin Laden at Tora Bora underscored the need for a more comprehensive, multifaceted approach to counterterrorism. These internal discussions ultimately led to revisions in military strategy and intelligence sharing, reinforcing the need for greater coordination and more effective use of resources in future operations. While the failure at Tora Bora was a bitter pill for the Pentagon, it provided valuable lessons that would influence U.S. military policy and tactics in the years that followed. The debates during this period revealed the complexities of modern warfare and the challenges of confronting a highly adaptive, elusive enemy like al-Qaeda. Political and military repercussions. The aftermath of the Tora Bora operation had significant political and military repercussions, both within the United States and internationally. The failure to capture or kill Osama bin Laden in this crucial moment created lasting political fallout and complicated U.S. efforts to achieve its goals in Afghanistan and the broader war on terror. Politically, the inability to neutralize bin Laden at Tora Bora became a point of intense criticism. Many opponents of the Bush administration pointed to the operation as an example of failed leadership and poor decision-making. The reliance on Afghan militias and the failure to commit sufficient ground forces were seen as missteps that allowed bin Laden to escape. This failure also fueled the narrative that the U.S. was not effectively following through on its promises to eliminate the terrorist threat. The escape cast a shadow over the early stages of the War on Terror, with critics questioning the resolve and strategic direction of U.S. policies in Afghanistan. In the military realm, the Tora Bora failure highlighted several important lessons that would shape future U.S. operations. First and foremost, the operation revealed the complexities of fighting in a rugged mountainous region with a lack of comprehensive control over local forces. The reliance on Afghan militias was a double-edged sword. While they provided critical manpower, their lack of training, unity, and loyalty created vulnerabilities. These issues forced the U.S. military to reconsider its approach to future missions in Afghanistan, emphasizing the need for more robust and coordinated ground operations and greater integration of local forces. Furthermore, Tora Bora underscored the challenges of intelligence gathering and coordination in such a volatile and remote environment. While satellite imagery, signals intelligence, and human intelligence provided useful insights, the inability to act quickly on this information meant that the opportunity to capture bin Laden was missed. This failure spurred efforts to improve intelligence sharing between agencies and develop more agile and responsive strategies for future counterterrorism operations. On the international front, the failure to capture bin Laden at Tora Bora also strained relations between the U.S. and its allies, particularly Pakistan. The porous border between Afghanistan and Pakistan allowed al-Qaeda militants to escape, and the lack of cooperation from Pakistan on border security led to frustrations within the U.S. military and intelligence community. This geopolitical tension continued to shape U.S. policy in the region and contributed to the ongoing challenges in combating terrorism in the years that followed. Ultimately, the political and military repercussions of Tora Bora served as a powerful reminder of the complexities involved in counterterrorism operations. The lessons learned from this operation influenced U.S. strategy in Afghanistan, emphasizing the need for comprehensive, well-coordinated approaches to combating global threats. Public reaction and media coverage. The public reaction and media coverage following the Tora Bora operation reflected the high stakes of the hunt for Osama bin Laden and the broader war on terror. The failure to capture or kill bin Laden during the operation sparked widespread frustration and disappointment, both within the United States and internationally. As the news of bin Laden's escape spread, it ignited debates about the effectiveness of the U.S. military strategy and raised concerns about the broader implications of the war on terror. In the United States, the media played a pivotal role in shaping public perception of the Tora Bora operation. News outlets covered the operation extensively, focusing on the failure to capture bin Laden despite being in close proximity. The coverage often highlighted the use of Afghan militias, the limitations of intelligence, and the difficulties posed by the rugged terrain. Many reports emphasized the sense of missed opportunity, framing the event as a significant blow to the U.S. military's credibility and its efforts to dismantle al-Qaeda. The media also fueled public disappointment with the political leadership at the time. Critics of the Bush administration seized upon the failed operation to question its handling of the war on terror. Television pundits, op-ed pieces, and political commentators were quick to point out what they saw as strategic missteps, such as underestimating the complexity of the Tora Bora region and relying too heavily on local Afghan forces. This criticism resonated with many Americans who felt that the failure to capture bin Laden undermined the country's national security efforts and the promises made after the September 11th attacks. Internationally, the media coverage of Tora Bora was similarly critical. News outlets around the world picked up on the narrative of bin Laden's escape, which contributed to the perception of the U.S. as a superpower that had been thwarted by a relatively small and well-armed network. The reports raised questions about the U.S. military's ability to effectively fight an elusive, decentralized enemy like al-Qaeda. The failure to capture bin Laden at Tora Bora also created a sense of uncertainty about the future of global counterterrorism efforts, as many feared that bin Laden's continued freedom would embolden extremist groups. Public opinion polls in the U.S. following Tora Bora revealed widespread dissatisfaction with the progress of the war on terror. Many Americans felt that the operation at Tora Bora had been a missed opportunity, which led to a loss of confidence in the government's ability to protect the nation. The media coverage of bin Laden's escape, combined with the public's frustration, placed significant pressure on the Bush administration to rethink its strategy in Afghanistan and the broader fight against terrorism. Overall, the media's portrayal of the Tora Bora operation played a key role in shaping the public's reaction and fueled ongoing debates about the effectiveness and direction of U.S. military and counterterrorism policy. Chapter 8: Legacy of Tora Bora. The Tora Bora operation, while ultimately a failure in terms of capturing Osama bin Laden, left a profound and lasting legacy in the context of U.S. military strategy and global counterterrorism efforts. The battle highlighted both the strengths and limitations of American military power and underscored the complex nature of fighting a decentralized and elusive enemy like al-Qaeda. The lessons learned from the operation would influence U.S. policy and military doctrine for years to come. One of the most significant legacies of Tora Bora was the re-evaluation of U.S. military strategy in Afghanistan and beyond. The operation revealed the challenges of conducting large-scale, high-stakes counterterrorism operations in rugged mountainous terrain, where the enemy had local knowledge and support. The failure to secure a decisive victory in Tora Bora underscored the importance of improving intelligence operations, ensuring better coordination with local forces, and developing more agile, adaptable military strategies. In the years that followed, the U.S. military would place greater emphasis on specialized, smaller-scale operations that leverage technology, intelligence, and elite forces to target high-value individuals, rather than relying heavily on conventional, large-scale military engagements. The Tora Bora operation also had a lasting impact on intelligence gathering techniques and the way the U.S. approached counterterrorism. The event led to a focus on enhancing collaboration between the intelligence community and military forces, as well as investing in more advanced surveillance and reconnaissance tools. The failure to act swiftly on actionable intelligence during the Tora Bora assault highlighted the need for real-time intelligence sharing and faster decision-making processes to respond to emerging threats. This shift in approach became a critical part of the U.S. strategy in the years that followed, particularly in the pursuit of high-profile terrorist leaders. Politically, the legacy of Tora Bora was marked by criticism of the U.S. government's handling of the war on terror. The operation was seen as a missed opportunity to eliminate al-Qaeda's leader, and the failure to capture bin Laden at Tora Bora fueled skepticism about the U.S. commitment to its stated goals. This sense of frustration contributed to broader public and political debates about the effectiveness of the U.S. strategy in the Middle East and South Asia, eventually influencing shifts in policy and leadership. Finally, the legacy of Tora Bora is inextricably linked to the enduring hunt for bin Laden, which would continue for nearly a decade. While the failure at Tora Bora allowed bin Laden to escape into Pakistan, it ultimately led to a more persistent and focused pursuit, culminating in his death in 2011. In retrospect, Tora Bora marked a critical juncture in the war on terror, one that shaped the U.S. approach to counterterrorism operations, military engagement, and international cooperation in the years that followed. Lessons learned by U.S. forces. The Tora Bora operation, while marked by failure in capturing Osama bin Laden, provided several valuable lessons for U.S. forces that would significantly influence future military operations. These lessons focused on improving coordination, intelligence gathering, and the integration of local forces, shaping U.S. military strategy for years to come. One of the most critical lessons learned was the importance of coordination between different military branches and intelligence agencies. At Tora Bora, while Special Forces, CIA operatives, and Afghan militias worked together, the lack of seamless coordination led to missed opportunities. The operation showed that more integrated communication and planning between ground troops, air support, and intelligence services could have yielded better results. In response, the U.S. military increasingly focused on creating joint task forces where all aspects of the operation were planned and executed together, ensuring better efficiency and responsiveness. The operation also underscored the importance of reliable intelligence. Despite having valuable information about bin Laden's whereabouts, U.S. forces struggled to act on it in a timely manner. This failure emphasized the need for faster decision-making processes, real-time intelligence sharing, and more agile responses to emerging threats. Over the following years, the U.S. invested heavily in enhancing its intelligence infrastructure, making it a top priority to improve both the speed and accuracy of intelligence gathering and analysis, which would be pivotal in future counterterrorism efforts. Additionally, the Tora Bora operation highlighted the challenges of relying on local Afghan militias, whose loyalty and capabilities were often unreliable. While these militias were instrumental in the initial stages of the operation, they lacked the training, discipline, and cohesion needed to carry out complex military tasks. This shortcoming led to a reevaluation of the role local forces would play in future operations. The U.S. would later focus more on training and equipping indigenous forces, ensuring they were better prepared for critical missions and less dependent on unreliable local militias. Finally, Tora Bora taught U.S. forces the value of adaptability and flexibility. The rugged mountainous terrain posed significant challenges, and the operation revealed how important it was for U.S. forces to adapt their tactics to the specific environment. In future operations, Special Forces adopted more flexible, rapid response tactics, emphasizing the ability to adapt to ever-changing circumstances on the ground. In sum, while Tora Bora was a failure in many respects, the lessons learned from the operation were instrumental in refining U.S. military strategies, particularly in counterterrorism operations, shaping the conduct of future engagements in Afghanistan and other global hotspots. How the battle shaped U.S. policy. The Battle of Tora Bora played a pivotal role in shaping U.S. policy, particularly in the areas of military strategy, counterterrorism efforts, and foreign relations. While the failure to capture Osama bin Laden at Tora Bora raised questions about the effectiveness of the U.S. approach, it also prompted critical changes that would influence policy decisions for years to come. One of the most immediate impacts of Tora Bora on U.S. policy was the rethinking of military strategy in the context of the War on Terror. The operation underscored the limitations of relying on large-scale conventional military operations in difficult terrain against an elusive and decentralized enemy. In the wake of Tora Bora, there was a shift toward more specialized, targeted approaches, emphasizing the use of elite forces like Navy SEALs and Army Rangers, along with increased reliance on advanced technology and intelligence. This approach would come to define U.S. counterterrorism efforts in the years that followed, including operations to capture or kill high-value targets such as bin Laden. Tora Bora also influenced U.S. foreign policy, particularly in its relationships with allied countries in the fight against terrorism. The failure to capture bin Laden during the operation prompted greater emphasis on strengthening international partnerships and enhancing cooperation with local governments and forces in the Middle East and South Asia. The U.S. recognized the need for more reliable local allies and began prioritizing training and equipping indigenous forces to better support counterterrorism operations. This shift marked a broader strategy of fostering partnerships rather than relying solely on U.S. military might. In addition, the Tora Bora operation brought to light the importance of intelligence and surveillance in counterterrorism operations, leading to a shift in U.S. intelligence policy. The failure to act on real-time intelligence during the operation highlighted the need for more efficient and rapid information sharing mechanisms between the military and intelligence agencies. This led to a series of reforms aimed at improving the coordination and flow of intelligence, which became a cornerstone of future U.S. counterterrorism policies. Politically, the operation contributed to ongoing debates within the U.S. about the effectiveness of the war on terror and the broader strategy in the Middle East. Critics argued that the failure to capture bin Laden at Tora Bora signaled a lack of commitment to achieving U.S. objectives, influencing domestic and international opinions about the success of U.S. policies in the region. The fallout from Tora Bora also played a role in shaping the national discourse surrounding the war on terror and future military engagements in the Middle East. In summary, the Battle of Tora Bora was a significant moment in the war on terror, leaving a lasting imprint on U.S. policy and military strategy. It drove a shift toward more specialized, intelligence-driven operations, fostered stronger international partnerships, and influenced the future trajectory of U.S. foreign and defense policy. The continued search for bin Laden. The failure to capture Osama bin Laden at Tora Bora marked only the beginning of an extended and intense pursuit that would last nearly a decade. Despite his escape into Pakistan, the U.S. government remained resolute in its commitment to bring the al-Qaeda leader to justice. This pursuit involved a complex combination of military operations, intelligence gathering, and international cooperation that ultimately culminated in bin Laden's death in 2011. In the years following Tora Bora, the U.S. ramped up its efforts to track down bin Laden, utilizing a variety of intelligence sources, including human intelligence, HUMINT, signals intelligence, SIGINT, and satellite reconnaissance. The hunt for bin Laden became a priority for U.S. intelligence agencies, who relentlessly analyzed potential leads, tracked his supporters, and monitored known safe havens in the tribal areas of Pakistan and Afghanistan. One key breakthrough came from the identification of a trusted courier who was believed to be a close associate of bin Laden, leading authorities to a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, where bin Laden was ultimately found. The U.S. also continued to rely on military operations in the region, particularly drone strikes, to target al-Qaeda operatives and disrupt the organization's activities. However, the search for bin Laden was not only a military effort. It required significant diplomatic and intelligence coordination between the U.S. and Pakistan, despite strained relations. The Pakistani government was often seen as a reluctant partner in the pursuit, and its involvement in harboring militants within its borders became a point of contention between the two nations. The hunt for bin Laden also had significant ramifications on the ground in Afghanistan and Pakistan, as local forces were involved in the broader counterterrorism efforts. Afghan and Pakistani forces, along with NATO allies, worked together to disrupt al-Qaeda's network, but the mountainous and politically unstable regions presented significant challenges. This ongoing effort was marked by both successes and setbacks, with intelligence failures, miscommunication, and the complexities of local politics often complicating the mission. In the end, the persistence of U.S. forces, combined with invaluable intelligence and strategic operations, led to the successful raid on bin Laden's compound on May 2, 2011. His death marked the culmination of one of the most extensive manhunts in modern history, bringing closure to the decade-long search and dealing a significant blow to al-Qaeda. However, it also underscored the enduring nature of the global fight against terrorism, with the legacy of the hunt continuing to shape U.S. counterterrorism policies and operations. Conclusion. The Battle of Tora Bora and the subsequent hunt for Osama bin Laden represents a crucial chapter in the War on Terror, one that shaped U.S. military strategy, intelligence operations, and foreign policy for years to come. While the failure to capture bin Laden at Tora Bora was a significant setback, it catalyzed critical reforms and adjustments in how the U.S. approached counterterrorism and military engagements. The operation's immediate impact was felt in the rethinking of military tactics, with a greater emphasis placed on intelligence-driven, smaller-scale operations rather than large-scale conventional military actions. The lessons learned from Tora Bora led to more focused efforts, including specialized raids, improved coordination between military and intelligence agencies, and a shift towards more agile rapid response tactics. These adaptations would become central to the U.S. approach in the following years, particularly in the fight against high-value targets like bin Laden. Tora Bora also reshaped U.S. foreign policy, particularly in the Middle East and South Asia. The failure to capture bin Laden underscored the need for stronger partnerships with local forces and governments. This shift led to increased efforts to train and equip indigenous military forces in countries like Afghanistan and Pakistan, enhancing cooperation in the broader fight against terrorism. The continued search for bin Laden was marked by persistent intelligence efforts, military operations, and international cooperation. While the manhunt spanned nearly a decade, the eventual success in locating and eliminating bin Laden in 2011 brought closure to one of the most intense and high-profile searches in history. It marked a turning point in the global fight against terrorism, symbolizing the resilience and determination of the U.S. and its allies. In retrospect, the Battle of Tora Bora and the years that followed served as a critical juncture in the War on Terror. The operation's failure did not mark the end of the fight against al-Qaeda, but rather set the stage for a more targeted, intelligence-driven approach to combating terrorism. While the legacy of Tora Bora is marked by the missed opportunity to capture bin Laden, it also provided vital lessons that shaped the future of U.S. counterterrorism policy, military strategy, and international cooperation in the ongoing battle against global terrorism.